What up guys, Otterpop here. Yes, all of the South Park Season 7 stuff is going to be right here in this video. And when I say all of it, I mean all of it. So all the reviews are going to be tied to this exact same video because, I can review stuff and put it on YouTube as long as I use little to no of the original material. So yeah, all the reviews are going to be here. And all the reactions are going to be linked down in the description below. And I have decided, and don't worry, Season 11 will be coming. These are just really slow and tricky for me to put out sometimes. But I think what I'm going to do for Season 11 is, release it after Seasons 8, 9, and 10 also get released on this channel. But I've also made a decision for Season 12, because Season 12 is currently only on Patreon right now. Technically, Season 11 is as well. So Seasons 11 and 12 reactions are only on Patreon right now. And what I'm going to do for Season 12 is I will only release it to the public if I get 100 patrons on Patreon. At the moment I have 43 or something like that. But it's just what I gotta do. I'm not making any money off of any of the videos whatsoever. Patreon is the only thing that's supporting me financially on that front. So I kind of do gotta push the Patreon a little bit. Besides, I've changed up the tiers and I've changed up the rewards and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty solid right now, and I think it'll stay the way it is for a while. And there are 4 tiers now on Patreon. You got the Otterpups, which greatly benefit from all the South Park material, from Hunter's material, and from occasional other little bits and pieces as well. You have the Otterlings tier, early access to any video, like any video, plus some extra in-depth stuff on some art and writing projects. But then you get to the next 2 tiers. The next 2 tiers are the good ones, though. The River Otters not only get early access to every single one of the videos, lots more in-depth information on art projects, writing projects, video projects, but, on my Otterpop TV account, I've been recently posting a bunch of videos where, all the reactions and stuff are going to be slightly edited, transparent, lower audio versions, and that's just what's publicly available. But River Otters, and Sea Otters as well, will get high-resolution videos, non-transparent, it's not flipped, the audio isn't messed with or anything like that. It's actually a little bit louder in the cases of the videos as opposed to the camera. But the River Otters get exclusive access to those high-resolution reactions, and again, with plenty of other things. And the Sea Otters get pretty much all of the above, plus some occasional behind-the-scenes stuff, and, exclusive chances to be able to, play games with me, or exclusive access to certain kinds of videos. So that won't be published anywhere else, not even publicly. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff for Patreon, and again, I kind of have to because I'm not making any money on this, so I don't have too much of a choice, honestly, because the YouTube does take a lot out of me, it really does. But anyways, that's what I'm thinking about for Season 12. So I've got to reach 100 patrons on Patreon if I'm going to publish Season 12 reactions for everybody to see. We'll see how that goes. But for now, Season 7. So yeah, all the reviews are here. All the reaction links are going to be down in the description, so go ahead and look for those. And I will see you guys later. Peace. What up guys, Otterpop here, and welcome back to another South Park review. South Park reviews are back, and this time I'm going to be reviewing Season 7 of the series. So I'm a little bit behind, well actually I'm frankly a lot bit behind, but I didn't want to push back any further with like the reviews and the reactions, so I'm just going to have to speed through everything, I swear. So a couple of things real quick before I actually start the review. As usual, the link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, so go ahead and check that out. Secondly, I've actually thought about starting something a little bit new with the reviews, where instead of it's me reviewing, it's actually like, a sort of animatic video that animatic review that I'm hoping with various poses of myself, or at least my South Park OC that has actually been drawn by somebody else. They've actually done a really good job with a lot of the poses so far, and they did it really fast too, so huge kudos to Chloe, you know who you are. So I'm thinking about doing that, and I'm thinking about starting that in Season 8, unless people think it sounds like an interesting idea, then maybe I might start it in the middle of Season 7, but it kind of depends. And ooh, I feel like there was something else that I was going to mention, but I really don't remember what the frick else I was going to mention, so let's just go ahead and jump right into the frickin' review, shall we? So, very, very, very quick recap of Season 7, Episode 1, Cancelled. I'm going to start making these recaps a lot shorter because you've probably already seen the reaction, or you've seen the episode, or both. Who knows? Anyways, the episode literally starts off the exact same way, well, almost exactly the same way, as the very first episode of the very first season. But then they're like, wait, something weird is going on. Then they end up finding that, oh, Cartman has a... It's like Cartman has an anal probe all over again, but they actually know it this time. So they end up getting abducted by aliens as a result, and find out that their entire planet is literally just a show for a bunch of alien races. And so the boys are desperately trying not to get their show canceled and stuff like that. And of course, humans are aware of it by now that they're a part of a TV show, and that means that, yeah, Earth has to be canceled now. So the boys are like, okay, well, we're just gonna blackmail you instead. And it works. And everybody's memory gets erased. So yeah, that is basically what happened. I was actually at first really surprised as to how quickly I caught on that it was basically taking almost exactly the same words and scenes from the very first episode, Cartman gets an anal probe. I was amazed, like I caught on within like 30 seconds that it was basically the same episode, but with slightly different dialogue options. Some, like, more profane at least, like, you know, Hike was saying, don't kick the goddamn baby. It was so funny. And then, of course, you know, they're starting to realize that, wait, this has happened before. And I'm just like, okay, something fishy's going on. I did not expect that when they got abducted by aliens, that it was basically just a TV show. But it's so meta. South Park is such a... It's so well known for doing stuff like that. It's known for being, like, just super meta in that respect because... I think it was later on in the episode where I was taking a guess that... I lost my train of thought. I think around the middle, or kind of a little after the middle of the episode, I was thinking to myself, oh wait, this would probably be about the 100th episode or something like that. I was trying to math in my head, but I couldn't remember exactly numbers, but I'm like, yeah, it sounds about right that this could be the 100th episode. So that's kind of why there was, you know, talk during the episode about, you know, the whole thing with Earth being canceled, the show being canceled and stuff like that, and subsequently destroyed as a result. Oh my gosh, I keep losing my train of thought. I need to stop veering in so many different directions, I swear. I also get the feeling that maybe I should stop talking so fast too. Maybe that'll help. But anyways, similar to South Park, which had basically reached about 100 episodes at that point, or not quite, but more on that later. But the Earth had reached 100 episodes, and it was probably bound to get, you know, worse over time, so it's like, oh, we're just gonna cancel the show. Well, it's absolutely meta, because at that point, South Park, well, technically, by the time the episode had aired, basically had 100 episodes under its belt. So there was a potential of it being canceled or something like that, because it's like, yeah, it's had about 100 episodes, it's had a good run, alright, time to move out of the way, time to make room for some other shows. Although it is, after doing a little bit of research, Cancelled was supposed to be the 100th episode, but it was like the 96th or something like that. The airing dates were they were switched up or funky or something like that. I don't exactly know, but it was supposed to be the 100th episode, which would have been extremely meta, but it wasn't, which is almost ironic. Because it was basically a meta episode about, you know, how long a show is and how long a show can be after that. But it wasn't technically the 100th episode, but it was still close enough, so it kind of counted. I'm not sure if you know, again, things got funky with the release date. Release date isn't what I'm looking for, but you guys know what I mean. But I swear, I keep losing my train of thought. Either way, at that point, South Park had been going on for 6 seasons and was almost 100 episodes, so I guess whether it was going to continue or not was maybe a little bit up in question. So, but they continued. I mean, they continued for a damn long time after that, clearly. It's on friggin' season 23 or 24, whatever nonsense that is. I think it's actually 24 now that I think about it. But still, it was... I think it would have been funnier if it was the actual 100th episode of the series. Like, for obvious reasons.
but it also kind of made sense to have it as the season premiere, or as a season premiere, you know, for season 7 and stuff like that. Like, I don't know, like, both could have worked out, and, you know, the point was still there. South Park creators clearly still wanted to keep making episodes, and this episode absolutely reflects that. There are also quite a few stereotypes that I picked up on, with, like, you know, the TV executive producers being Jewsians, or like Joziens or something like that, and you know they oh my gosh, controlling the news network, big noses, and just like, oh my gosh, feeding on so many freaking Jewish stereotypes. It was actually kind of funny. I think I actually mentioned this in my reaction, but the only reason that I even really know about that stereotype is because, again, there's a comedian. He's got a more blunt and sometimes a little bit of a darker style of comedy, which clearly I seem to be a fan of. I mean, just look at this. I'm watching the show, but like he's a tall, lanky, redheaded Jewish comedian, and he's had like some comments and videos about topics like this. So I'm like, oh, I did not know that was a stereotype, but now I know, and I was able to recognize that in the episode. It's about time that I freaking recognized, like, either a major event or a major known stereotype or something in one of these episodes, because more often than not I don't, or I like know the thing, or I know something that everybody, well, that's probably not the best way of explaining it. Point is, I'm not really great when it comes to knowledge about stuff like that. So the fact that I actually knew about it and I could identify it as a parody or humor in a South Park episode, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. But yes, that's basically all this episode was. It was basically just one big meta commentary on South Park itself. Like, it's really not any more obvious than that. There's really no underlying meaning, but clearly South Park wanted to, or, well, whether it wanted to or not, it continued for a long time, even after that 100th episode came out. So, yeah. But that was a pretty fun episode. I'll give it that. It was a pretty good season premiere. I will definitely give it that. So, again, apologies for losing my train of thought multiple times. I'll try to get better with that, but no guarantees, because I'm not good at doing that. I'm not good at losing my train of thought and trying to get back on the track, so... Oh boy. And if you guys do have any thoughts on what I was mentioning earlier about potential animatic reviews, again, I know that I want to do it. I'm planning on probably starting at season 8, unless people think it sounds like a really cool and better idea. I might start it sometime in the middle of season 7. I'm not entirely sure yet. But if I got feedback from you guys, that would be fantastic. And again, sorry for losing my train of thought. Shit happens. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to end this review here. Again, the link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, as per usual. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you enjoyed my reaction, and season 7 is here. So thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed these, and as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 2, Krazy Kripples, with K's. I at first didn't understand why the episode was titled that, but as soon as I watched it, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes just a little more sense. So, ow! Oh, I almost choked on my own spit. Oh, fudge. As usual, the link to the actual reaction is going to be down in the description below, but if you're looking for the review, you have come to the right place. So, quick recap of the episode. Jimmy is doing some stand-up comedy, but nobody wants to go because they're all paying attention to Christopher Reeve's speech, who is also a cripple, although he wasn't crippled at birth like Jimmy and Timmy were, and so Jimmy gets really mad, and Jimmy and Timmy decide to, it's a Jimmy and Timmy-centric episode! They decide to form their own, like, club, the Crips, because, you know, crippled from birth and stuff, because they're mad at Christopher Reeve, who is, well, I'll talk about that later. But Jimmy and Timmy decide to call themselves the Crips. Yeah. So then they try and join a Denver branch of the Crips, and due to some misunderstandings, some other people get killed from a rival gang, because the Crips are a gang, and then the Bloods are also a rival gang, and it just goes haywire. But due to somewhat of a misunderstanding, I guess Jimmy and Timmy end up getting invited to join with the rest of the Crips. And yeah, things just kind of spiraled downward from there. Eventually, Jimmy and Timmy basically get the Crips and the Bloods to kind of, get along and, become friends and stuff, which I'm just like, that really worked. It really freaking worked that happened. And then, of course, there's a bit of a side plot where Christopher Reeve is, supporting like stem cell research, which is giving him superpowers, like friggin' Superman. And he tries to form his own like sort of Legion of Doom because he starts to go crazy with power from all the fetuses he's. I'm not even gonna say it. I'm not even gonna say it. In the end, the Crips and the Bloods get along, and Christopher Reeve is basically shot off into space, and he's basically like imprisoned or something like that. So he's basically gone, and a law's passed regarding stem cell research and stuff. And the boys, being Cartman, Stan, Kyle, and Kenny, I almost fudged that up somehow, were just like, yeah, we are so glad we stayed out of all of this, like stayed out of everything. So yeah, that's basically what happened. I'll be honest, as soon as I saw that Jimmy and Timmy were both kind of in this episode and they were like, getting along after the events of, what was it? I don't remember exactly which episode, but it was the one where it was the episode where Jimmy was introduced, but now they're getting along. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, yes, a Jimmy and Timmy centric episode. I didn't know I needed this in my life, and I don't know why, but I was just super happy and super excited to have Jimmy and Timmy as basically the stars of the episode in their own way. And then again, there was still the huge misunderstanding with how they even got accepted into the Crips gang in the first place, even though both gangs are basically, at least at the time, they were basically like African American only kind of groups, if I'm recalling correctly. I don't really know, like I'd heard of them kind of, but didn't really know anything, so I wasn't entirely sure, or I was like, oh no, maybe these aren't the real names, but maybe they're based off of real. No, I should have guessed that they were just based off of real gangs, and they were just like, a friggin' parody and humor and stuff like that. I really should have guessed something like that. But again, the nonsense that Jimmy and Timmy had to go through to even get into the gang, and then what kind of happened during that. And of course, the whole finale with that sort of arc, where Jimmy and Timmy were able to get the Bloods and the Crips all locked up in a recreation center due to some, casual manipulation and all that, so they're basically doing Cartman, but with good intentions this time. But they basically manipulated them all into getting into a recreation center and getting along and stuff without somehow shooting each other, which, miracle in of itself and would doubtfully ever happen. But it was still really entertaining to watch them both in this completely new environment that they knew nothing about. They clearly knew nothing about and were clearly misunderstood by a lot of it, but they still wanted to do everything to get along, and in the end they learned that it doesn't matter if you're crippled at birth or crippled later in life, we're all people, or, there's always going to be disabled people, and we should all be getting along kind of thing. So that was kind of the message they took away from that, which, hey, I can get behind that. Like, anyone can get behind that. Like, we're all people, we're all different, like all the different genders and, races and religions, and yes, even between what maybe would consider normal people or disabled people, or just, it doesn't matter, like, we're all different, but we're all people. So why can't we just get along? Like, who cares if we were never disabled, if we were disabled from birth or later in life? Doesn't matter. We're all people. Let's just get along. Let's put aside our differences. I mean, that was kind of, the most generic point that they could get across with something like that, but I can understand where they were kind of coming from and where they were kind of going, like, especially because Jimmy was the one who was initially getting mad about the whole, Christopher Reeve apparently thinks he's better than me because he was crippled later in life and not at birth, and all that freaking nonsense. It kind of makes sense almost that it was Jimmy who was the one who was, mad about something like that. I could see him having that kind of personality where he would immediately get upset by something like that. And I think Timmy wasn't exactly. He just kind of followed along with Jimmy because he's like, yeah, I guess I'm a little upset by it. And not quite as much as Jimmy necessarily, but, they had to have Jimmy and Timmy because, both of them still understood. I mean, they didn't really understand technically. They still had to learn a lesson by the end of it, but you get the point. And then, of course, what freaking started all of this was the whole, Christopher Reeve trying to be supportive of stuff like stem cell research, because, he was a very well-known actor. He was Superman for quite a while, so, he was a very well-known actor, and then he got, I vaguely remember that something happened, but I didn't exactly remember what. I mean, it was technically before I was born, or right around the time I was born, I think, but he got into, like, an accident and he was like paralyzed from the shoulders down or something like that, so he was supporting like all kinds of research and stuff like that, and like stem cell research in general is it's not quite as much as it is nowadays, but especially I could see back then it was just a bit of a controversial topic, because if you don't know what stem cells are, like everybody has stem cells, like even us as adults. So, I mean, if you guys don't know what a stem cell is, and I didn't really study too much of this in school, but I still have a vague idea of kind of what it is. But it's basically a single type of cell that can differentiate into various other types of cells. So it's like a single cell that could eventually become like a neural cell or a stomach cell, or something like that, but it has the ability to differentiate into various different types of cells. And again, adults still have those, but we only have a couple of those in some areas of our bodies. I think the bone marrow is one of the locations where they can be found, but they can only differentiate into like, a couple different types of stem cells. Whereas embryonic stem cells have the ability to differentiate into all different kinds of cells. Like it absolutely makes sense, given how when you're growing inside the embryo, like you need to have those basic cells that do have the ability to change and develop and differentiate into various types of cells. Like it makes sense why embryonic stem cells are much more, in a way, valuable. But of course, using those would often, or always, one of the two, would often or always result in basically the destruction of the fetus, of the embryo itself, even though it was technically used for medical purposes. And like, I don't know if it's still a controversial topic nowadays, because I know that, stem cell research and stuff like that has been used for things like, cloning and medical procedures, and it's actually come quite a long way, from what I understand. And from what I also understand, they've also been able to find ways to culture stem cells instead of like, requiring that you have an actual embryo or something like that. But like they can sort of be cultured and like genetically engineered or modified. I haven't really caught up too much with information about that, but I'm pretty sure I remember hearing something about that in like the recent 5 or 10 years, something like that. Again, I could be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm at least right or partially right. But I can imagine, especially back then, that kind of would have been a little bit of a controversial topic. Like I think very similar to the idea of abortion, whether it's pro-choice or pro-life. It's more like pro-life or pro-science, I guess you could say. And this is one of those weird scenarios where I can see both sides of the argument working. Like I can understand why people would have a problem with stuff like, embryonic stem cells and whatnot. I can understand why people would have a problem with that, but they also would provide a huge benefit to the medical community. Like, again, they did provide a huge benefit to the medical community in trying to understand how they worked and how they could be cultured and sort of created in a way, like, because that's valuable research that could and might even have saved plenty of lives in the past. Again, I can understand it from both sides of the argument. I really can. Am I really one side or another? I'm not really sure, because again, I've never really been in that particular kind of situation before, so I couldn't really say whether I'm on one side or another. So at least that's kind of my thought on that. Like, even for example, if I knew that I was going to be pregnant, you know, don't get me wrong. I love science, but I also want to have a kid. So it's one of those weird things where I'm like, well, I could go one way or the other kind of thing. Like I think I'd be more likely to just have a kid myself. But would it ever be possible that I might get pregnant or something like that, and like basically give that to stem cell research? I don't know. It is possible, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not about to make that kind of judgment call right now, because, well, for one thing, I don't plan on getting pregnant anytime soon. But yeah, it's, again, I can understand the arguments and the problems. Like I can understand both sides of the issue, and I can understand where people are coming from. It kind of just depends on your general point of view. And again, it has made some incredible advancements, especially in the medical community. But yeah, there are always some of those tough subjects to talk about, and usually I have a pretty good idea of where I stand on. I'm usually kind of more on the moral side of things, sometimes the logical, but it kind of just depends. But usually I stand pretty firm on what I say, but I also try and understand it from both or multiple points of view, especially in controversial topics like this. I mean, there are plenty of other controversial topics, but I'm pretty sure that those are going to come up in a completely different, review or episode or whatever. Man, I've already been rambling on for some time. I do apologize for that, but it's also part of the reason why I do like some of these reviews. Especially when it concerns, even when it concerns, like, like darker topics, or topics that require like topics that focus on a little bit more controversial ideas. Like, I don't know why, but I do sometimes find those interesting. And, I also kind of, talk about what I think, because, I have my right. I'm obligated to my own opinion. Or, God, I cannot speak. I'm entitled to my own opinion. I'm not obligated to share it, but I will, usually, because, again, things like this come up in South Park episodes. I'm pretty sure I've already covered a couple of, pretty big and maybe, and controversial type topics in some South Park, episodes and reviews in the past. So, it's important to know, or to, even know about or discuss in any kind of way, because these topics can still have some relevance even today, even, 5, 10, 15 years after, they might come up in a South Park episode, or come up in, this TV series, or this movie, or this, platform, or something like that. Like, these kinds of things are going to come up, but it's for the most part just all about, understanding it from both sides of the fence, and just trying to understand it. Yeah, that's basically it. Trying to understand it and listen from both sides of the fence, instead of just focusing on your own opinion. Because, I mean, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. They're absolutely entitled to their own opinion. That's how we as humans work. But it's when we stop listening to everyone else that it becomes a problem, and we start becoming egocentric. We start becoming the centers of attention, and we start thinking that our opinion matters above anyone else's, and that we're the ones who are always right no matter what. Like, that's when it becomes a problem. But, I'm sure everybody has got their own opinion on, topics kind of like stem cell research, topics kind of like politics and abortions. And also, I'm not going to try and get into politics very much with any of my reviews, because I know that that's a very touchy thing, and even I don't know where I stand. That's one of the few things where I don't know where I stand. So, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I've been rambling on for a little bit too long, and I apologize for that, but sometimes it happens. I've accepted that at this point. Sometimes it happens. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review, and, I hope I didn't offend anybody. I don't think I would have, but hope I didn't offend anybody. So, but as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and this is going to be the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 3, Toilet Paper. I don't know how I almost fudged that. I swear, I somehow, even after always going over it over and over again in my head, I still manage to sometimes almost or definitively fudge up some of the numbers. I don't know why I do that. Anyways, as usual, the link to the actual reaction is going to be down in the description below, but this is a review, not the reaction, so let's go with a recap. Let's start with a recap. So the four boys end up doing a little bit of a naughty thing in art class, and they get detention for it, and they're super mad, so Cartman suggests they just TP the art teacher's house, who is the one who gave them detention and stuff. And of course they do it, but then Kyle sees that she has kids, and he starts feeling guilty about it, and he starts having nightmares and stuff, and it's, oh no, scary, I'm so guilty, I don't know what to do. It's funny that it's Kyle, by the way. Kyle considers confessing, but Cartman is basically like, no, you don't. He tries to, quote-unquote, kill him, but doesn't really have any good tools for doing that, so... And Kyle's not even defending himself because he still feels guilty. And then, of course, Officer Barbrady is trying to solve the TPing of the house, even though it's not a serious crime, but it's not like he's got anything better to do. And, he makes a big deal out of it, even bringing in Butters and, basically feeding him sodium pentothal to make him free and talk and stuff like that. Oh, it's so funny. And then, of course, once Stan and Kenny see that Butters is basically confessing to the TP crime that Butters didn't even commit, they're like, okay, we probably ought to confess too. But Cartman doesn't understand the principle of, guilt and, stuff like that. So, yeah. But Stan, Kenny, and Kyle are pretty much just like, yeah, well, we're gonna confess. And they're about to the next morning, but Cartman already has. And they all get detention, but Cartman gets less detention because he decided to do the right thing, which of course, understandably, pisses off Kyle to no end. So, yeah. And then, of course, a bit of a side plot. While Barbrady's trying to figure this out, he basically goes to this juvenile detention center to get help from this creepy little kid named Josh, something like that, to give him information on who could be TPing the house or whatever, and it's it's just funny. So after looking it up, I discovered that there were a lot of cultural references in this episode, and I'm like, what? The only one that I kind of got was the whole, was the Hannibal Lecter thing with, John or Josh, whatever the frick his name is, the kid from the juvenile detention center. Like, that was the only cultural reference I kind of got. Like, I knew I recognized it from something, but after looking up, I'm like, oh, it was Hannibal Lecter that I freaking recognized it. By the way, Anthony Hopkins is best Hannibal Lecter. It's freaking gold. It's so good. So good. But yes, there were plenty of cultural references, none of which I got, which I shouldn't be surprised that there were so many cultural references in this particular episode, but there were a whole bunch, and I'm not even going to go over them all because it's not like any of them I really knew, and none of them resonated with me anyways, but there was a little bit of one concept that did kind of resonate a little bit with me, and that was the guilt aspect of the episode. Like, there really wasn't any reason for Kyle to feel guilty as he was, although it also kind of makes sense because, at least of the four boys, Kyle seems to be the most emotional, or the most attuned with his emotions, at least. Like, Cartman definitely isn't, and Kenny doesn't, not really as much. Stan does seem to be attuned well with his emotions every now and then, but it kind of varies and it kind of depends. But Kyle definitely seems to be the most attuned with emotions, both positive and negative. I see it with his attunement with his negative emotions come out a little bit more often than with his positive emotions, but if that makes any sense at all. But I can see why he was a kid. He really didn't have a need to feel guilty for what he did. He just TP'd a house, and even the family who got TP'd didn't think it was a big deal. Like, they were trying to even tell Officer Barbrady, no, it's fine, it's just TP, we got this, we can clean it up, no big deal. So, I mean, yeah, Kyle, even being a kid, didn't really have much of a reason to feel guilty, but I can understand why, of the four boys, it was him that initially kind of felt the guilt. And then, of course, I could kind of understand why Stan and Kenny would feel a little guilty after seeing someone else basically pay for their crime. Which, again, wasn't really much of a crime, but, it was barely a misdemeanor even. Come on, it was just kids being kids. Kids being stupid. That's all it was. But even so, it was still really interesting to watch, you know, the guilt just kind of eat away at Kyle. Well, eat away at Kyle in a way. Like, it was all he could think about. He was having freaking, you know, crazy ass nightmares about it. And there was really no reason for him to, but it was still an interesting concept because that's something that kids don't always understand when they're that young. Like, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10. They don't always understand the concepts of, you know, guilt and feeling bad for people and judgment and consequences. They don't exactly understand that. Even the concept of, you know, the consequence of understanding the consequences of your action, of judging situations for what they are, and judging, you know, what could happen as a result of that, whether it's good or bad. That part of the brain doesn't actually, you know, finish formulating until you're in your 20s. So how can you possibly expect kids to understand stuff like that? Guilt is a little bit different because that's more of an emotion rather than, you know, using logic, kind of like with judgment and consequence. Guilt is a little bit more of emotion, so it's a little bit easier for kids to understand, but it's still something that kids don't always understand very often. And it was interesting to see it kind of explored a little bit in this episode, because, you know, guilt is definitely an emotion that, you know, a lot of kids, even especially at that young of an age, should know. They should know what it means to kind of feel bad for their own actions and, you know, to kind of feel bad for other people. Like, and I know that that sounds, you know, really wrong, but it's important for children to understand all kinds of emotions like that. It's important for them to understand what, you know, kind of what sadness is and what anger is and what, you know, happiness and joy is, but also what guilt is. Like, they need to at least have a basic idea of understanding those kinds of emotions, and guilt can sometimes be one of those really tricky ones to learn when you're that young. I mean, I know that, you know, even when I was never really very well attuned with my own emotions, but I also understood what guilt was, but I also didn't ever really do anything in my childhood that would warrant that, but I still understood it to a little bit of an extent. And I started to understand a lot more as I was getting older, and I don't really ever feel guilty about things that I've done because, you know, I'm a good, responsible, respectable girl. I know I can do good, but, you know, we still have those moments when we're kids where we do something that we shouldn't have, and, you know, it ends up making somebody else feel kind of sad or angry, or, you know, maybe something of theirs gets destroyed. Like, you know, you break your grandmother's favorite vase or something like that, and, like, you know, you're running around the house and you bump the table and the vase gets broken, and it's like, I can't replace this. And then, you know, it's like, you know, not necessarily something that you might get in trouble for, whether, especially if it's an accident, but it's something that you still might feel guilty for. It's in a way, like, guilt is sort of the gateway to really understanding, like, empathy, and in a way as well sympathy, but, like, understanding that your actions can affect other people. I mean, again, that part of the brain doesn't form until you're a lot older, but it's starting to understand that that can happen, because, again, like, guilt results in, you know, you feeling bad for something that you did, usually what you did to something or someone else. And again, it's important to understand, because that kind of leads to a sense of empathy in a way. At least based on how I see it, based on what I've experienced, how I've seen it in other people, because empathy is a very important emotion, or a very important, no, it is kind of an emotion, but also not, because when you're empathetic, because there is a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is, you like understand that somebody else is feeling emotions, and, you know, you want to try and, you know, help them, and jeez. Sympathy is basically just understanding that somebody else is having very strong emotions, and you can recognize that. Empathy is understanding those emotions and being able to feel them yourself. So, well, I guess it could be important to understanding both empathy and sympathy. Empathy can sometimes be a little bit trickier, and sympathy is usually a little bit easier, but guilt and empathy and sympathy, in my opinion at least, are definitely all very connected to one another, and it's important to understand, at least when you're that young, like as young as, you know, the boys, to understand the basis of those emotions, like, because they're very important to know. It's important for again, understanding your actions, but also understanding human emotions, understanding people and connecting with people. It's all very important. So I don't know why, it was just interesting to sort of look at that particular human emotion in this episode, even though, again, it wasn't too big of a deal, but it was still interesting that that particular kind of emotion was explored a little bit. So, but that was at least what I kind of thought of it. You know, there's plenty of cultural references, obviously. Again, I'm not going to go through it all, because, no. But definitely some interesting storytelling moments, and, you know, it was a good episode. I liked it. Then again, I pretty much like a lot of these episodes, so... And who knows, like, I've even noticed that sometimes I can make light of things or make connections to some aspects and ideas and concepts that other people are like, oh, I never thought about it that way. I only do that on occasion, though. Most of the time it's just, yeah, I get what you were going for, so... But, yeah, sorry I went on this long spiel, and again, if some of it sounds like nonsense, I apologize, but this is just what I think, and in a way, kind of how I feel, based on, you know, what I was seeing in the episode, and what I've experienced myself, what I've seen in other people, and what kind of makes the most sense to me. And it's not like I've necessarily done research on some things like these, but it's just what I notice, at least. And again, emotion isn't my strong point. It really isn't. But I'm not a rank amateur. I'm not a freaking Cartman. I at least understand. So, anyways, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna end the review there before I derail any further. Well, I didn't derail too much, but whatever. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review and the reaction. And as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 4, I'm a Little Bit Country. Now, if you're looking for the review, then you're in the right place, but if you're looking for the reaction, and kind of only care about the reaction, who knows? Could be some of you, could be a lot of you, I don't care. The link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, as per usual. But first, let's get on to a quick recap of the episode. I seriously need to work on trying to make these recaps a lot shorter. So by the time this episode had aired, which in a way is also kind of South Park time, the Iraqi War was kind of beginning. I almost said Vietnam War, but no, wrong decade. And Mr. Garrison basically tells the class during a school day that if you want to protest war, you can leave school early. So the kids do just that, and they don't get it. And because of a misunderstanding, the boys are like, we don't know who the Founding Fathers are, so they have to do a project now. And guess what? Cartman doesn't want to do it. No, it is absolutely not a shocker that Cartman doesn't want to do it. So while the other three boys start to try and study and begin working on their project to, you know, figure out what the Founding Fathers would do in a case like this, because there are lots of people that are protesting the war, and a lot of people that are be like, you know, send more troops over and kind of stuff like that, and they're starting to fight and kill each other a lot. But while the three boys, and by three boys I mean, of course, Stan, Kenny, and Kyle, try to study for the project, Cartman tries to induce a sort of flashback, which, I mean, it's not how it works, but of course, that's how it works, because Cartman is in a way transported or has a weird hallucination about being back in 1776 with the Continental Congress to figure out what the Founding Fathers would do in this kind of case, because, you know, it's very relevant. So while the pro-war country music side of things versus the anti-war rock and roll side of things are kind of starting to clash, and again, they're starting to kill one another, and eventually Cartman, you know, gets out of his hallucination or coma or whatever the frick it was, and is like, but we can have our cake and eat it too. You both need each other for different reasons, so you can still protest and still go to war so that, you know, reasons. And that's basically how the episode went. Now, as stated in the very end of this episode, this technically was the 100th episode. I mean, it would have made more sense if it was a Season 7 premiere, but it's, frankly, it was probably a little bit weird and close enough, whatever. But this was the actual 100th episode, as made clear by some of the lyrics at the very end of the episode. Why was I going to say that? I don't know. I don't know if that was necessarily significant in terms of the episode or the plot or whatever, but whatever. There you have it. This was the true 100th episode, not the Season 7 premiere, like I was kind of talking about in my review beforehand. Or I kind of briefly mentioned it in my reaction, but I also talked a little bit about it in that review as well. But yes, by the time that this episode had even aired in the first place, it was around the time that the Iraqi War had started. I don't know too much about that time. Again, even back then I was still pretty young and was pretty oblivious to a lot going on. But the Iraqi War was kind of starting, and, you know, American troops were getting sent over, so, I mean, from what I understand, there were plenty of clashes between, both sides of anti-war versus pro-war, and that's basically kind of reflected in what kind of happened with South Park, which, kind of makes sense, more or less. I feel like at the end of it, like the whole message or, message, lesson, whatever it is that was kind of revealed by the end of the episode, it's actually kind of weird to say, but Cartman was actually right. Of course he found it out through sort of giving himself a coma-induced hallucinogenic flashback or whatever the frick it was, but he ended up kind of being right in the end, because, both sides exist for a reason. Like, both sides aren't necessarily right or wrong. Like, in a way, the United States was kind of, like, built on the foundation of all kinds of freedoms and rights, but also with the intent of trying to remain neutral, which, we know what happened with the World Wars. We know what happened with the World Wars. That's all I need to say. But it was also interesting because it was like, well, we should give our people the right to protest, and, freedom to protest, freedom of speech, those kinds of things, to show that, we are still caring and compassionate people, and that we can use some empathy and some sound logic every now and then instead of just jumping to conclusions. But we also need the sort of pro-war side as well, to show that even if, we do get attacked or something, like Cartman said, or kind of to show that, we're not pussies or anything like that, that, that we can still... That we can still fight, I guess you could say. That we still have some strength and we won't be beaten down. We still need both sides, and both sides need each other for varying reasons. And, of course, the adults, throughout the entirety of the episode, are just arguing with one another, which then kind of turns to fighting and then kind of killing one another as well. Which, of course, why not? Because that's pretty typical for any South Park episode. Stop yawning! And then, of course, the episode's title was kind of based off of, the whole idea with I'm a little bit country, or not the idea, the song, I'm a little country, I'm a little rock and roll kind of thing. Apparently they tried to get the rights to the song to use specifically for the episode and didn't get it until like the very last minute or something like that, which is actually kind of funny. But, yeah, that's basically what the episode is. Like, this one was, like, a little less... Well, it was a little more obvious than some of the usual messages of the episode. Like, the tone and the story and the message were all very, very clear. Like, it was pretty obvious. Like, even I kind of knew the answer a little bit from the beginning. Like, I was kind of just thinking to myself as I was watching the episode, like, not one side is right over the other. They both have some merit, and they're both kind of right, and they kind of both have to work together. Like, even I knew at the beginning of the episode, but it was still kind of nice to see, South Park, talk about or not really talk about, but kind of just show a little bit something like this. And something that I also noticed, how it's like the pro-war side were the country fans, and the anti-war were the rock fans. This could just be my misconstrued conception about it. I'm not even sure if that was the right phrase to use. I may have just fudged myself over, but whatever. I almost feel like it would have been the opposite. If it's what was noticed, what was happening back then, with a lot of the... with a lot of the, like, pro-war songs being by country artists, or being, like, by country artists or country genre, and then a lot of anti-war songs being made by, like, rock and roll or rock artists and in the rock genre and stuff like that. Like, I guess that kind of makes sense, but at the same time I feel like it might have been the other way around. I'm not entirely sure. Like, that kind of stuff is not my specialty. Not in the slightest. So, take a little bit of what I say with a grain of salt, especially when it comes to stuff like that. Music is not necessarily my strong point. It really isn't. I'm not the best judge of music, honestly. I'm very, very picky with my music, if people don't know. Other than that, there really wasn't too much more about the episode that I could possibly add. Although one little minor detail, I don't even know how I thought of it, but kind of one little minor detail I did kind of notice was that, like, when Mr. Garrison was telling the class about, you can get out of school or stuff for protesting the war and stuff like that, and basically the entire class left, and including, like, the four boys, but also including a character, Wendy, who, if you don't know, is fairly, like, logical and outspoken. She's probably one of the most logical of the children, honestly. Or at least of the 4th graders. I almost said 8th graders, but I'm like, no, they're 8. Well, technically Kyle, I think, is 9 or something. I don't exactly know how it works. Anyways, losing my train of thought. But it was kind of interesting how, you know, Wendy was kind of just like, yay, no more school, when in a weird way it seems like this is the exact sort of thing she might be going for. I feel like she could either potentially be on both sides, or on one side or the other, and she'd be very passionate about it, but it's interesting that she wasn't. I mean, she wasn't exactly the focus of this episode, it was kind of more of a concept rather than a couple of characters that were the focus of the episode in a way, so maybe that's why that happened, but it was just kind of an interesting little tidbit that I noticed. Again, just a little something that I noticed is all. But yeah, there really isn't too much to say about this particular episode, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, sometimes you just get episodes like that. Episodes that I might not feel strongly about. Stop yelling! Thank you. But yeah, I guess in this case, I really don't have too much more to add in terms of a review for this episode. And again, like, I feel like, you know, some of the reviews are kind of like this, where there's just not a lot to say, or it may not even resonate very strongly with me, or I may not necessarily have a strong opinion on it, because in a way, you know, there are plenty of issues where you can have, like, an opinion, like, there are multiple sides of the story. It's not even just, you know, two sides of the same fence. It could be, like, you know, this little plot of land, or this little plot of land, this plot of land, like, there are so many opinions that can come in all different kinds of ways, but this one was a little bit more clear, or had a bit more clarity in terms of the overall idea and message, if that makes sense. I don't know, maybe it doesn't, but that's all I got for now. I really don't have much more to say about this episode. So I guess I'm going to have to end it there. So thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the review and or the reaction, if you watched one or both, whatever. And as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the South Park Season 7, Episode 5. The review for South Park Season 7, Episode 5, Fat Butt and Pancake Head. Oh my gosh, I cannot speak right. If you're looking for the reaction, as usual, the link is going to be down in the description below. But if you're looking for the review, you've come to the right place. Let's get on with the recap, shall we? So there's a cultural event going on at the school, and everybody's doing presentations, and Cartman's presentation is like, I've got a guest, it's Jennifer Lopez, and everybody's like, oh, but no, it's literally just a hand puppet who's like, my name is Jennifer Lopez. And also I'll be referring to J-Lo and Jennifer, so that you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. If you've seen the episode, which you've probably seen the episode and or the reaction at this point, so you'll probably know exactly who I'm talking about. But basically, Cartman does this little hand puppet thing. Jennifer Lopez. I'm sorry, it's so stupid and funny. But either way, Kyle is mad at Cartman for reasons, and, you know, like, Cartman decides to do this whole, like, little dumb music video and sending it to a record label who's like, oh, this chick seems a lot better than Jennifer Lopez, so Jennifer Lopez ends up getting fired, and she gets, I'm sorry, J-Lo gets, you know, really pissed off, and she starts to she goes to South Park and beats Jennifer, and then her, boyfriend at the time or whatever, I don't exactly remember, is Ben Affleck, and he starts to have feelings for Jennifer and not for J-Lo, which just makes things infinitely more confusing, especially with some of the scenes that follow afterwards involving Ben Affleck and Jennifer. It's that. But either way, it seems like Jennifer has a mind of her own, and J-Lo is like, okay, well, I'm gonna kill this bitch, so, you know, she tries to, but then gets caught, and then, Jennifer is just like, I'm not really Jennifer, I'm actually a con man named Mitch Connor, and then basically kills himself with a cyanide pill, and just kind of goes away. And Cartman's like, a lot of shit happens in this town, don't you think it's possible that something weird like this could happen? And Kyle's like, okay, fine, that's possible. And Carl's like, yeah, I got to admit it. Dumb. The premise for this episode was just mind-boggling. Oh, there's just no explaining it. You can't. So I actually had no idea about this, but at the time, a lot of people were starting to make fun of slash hate on both Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck by the time by the time that this episode was even released, and you know, the creators were kind of like, yeah, we're kind of thinking the same thing. And so I didn't even think about this, but the episode title, Fat Butt and Pancake Head, is kind of a sort of joking reference to that, where they thought that J-Lo had like a, you know, fat butt or whatever, and then apparently Ben Affleck has like a really flat face if you look at it from a certain way, so it like looked like a pancake. Hence Pancake Head, I guess. I that was actually really funny to learn. When I learned that, I actually paused and kind of took a moment to laugh, because I'm like, okay, that is hilarious. The episode title makes a lot more sense now. I feel like maybe I should have gotten it, but when it comes to celebrities, I'm just usually a lot less familiar because I usually don't care as much, but that's just me. And then, of course, there were a couple of other scenes, kind of like, you know, especially with Jennifer and Ben Affleck, especially with the car scene. You guys know what I mean. The creators were actually shocked that they were clear to get that scene on the air. They were shocked that that was allowed to happen. But they were like, but it's still funny. And I'm like, I mean, I guess it is, but at the same time, I just... if you haven't seen my reaction to either that episode or that particular scene especially, if you haven't seen that yet, you should, because it's actually kind of funny. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I was like, no freaking way this is happening right now. I'm sorry, I keep laughing. So, of course, this episode was just basically kind of a riff on J-Lo and, you know, Ben Affleck, which, you know, cool story, bro. But the biggest thing that was just getting me the most was constantly being on the fence of, is this real or is this just Cartman freaking with everybody? Because both seemed absolutely possible. And what I mean that being like the big question on my mind for the entirety of the episode, even like right at the end, was kind of just like, is this hand puppet thing sentient or is it not? Because in the South Park universe, this is entirely possible. It is entirely possible that this thing is sentient and has a mind of its own. Like there were a couple of scenes where it seemed like that. Actually, a bunch of scenes where it seemed like that. But at the same time, it's like, but this is Cartman. He's the master manipulator of South Park and the South Park universe in general. He's the master like, he would be able to do something like this. So it was just a constant back and forth of, is this thing real? Is it actually, is this Mitch Connor, Jennifer Lopez thing actually sentient? Or is it not? Oh, my mind was blown even by the end of it. I couldn't freaking believe it. It's definitely one of the most mind-boggling episodes I've experienced to date in the South Park. Like, I've experienced a couple. Like, some that just really frick with my head. I always think of a couple right off the top of my head. But this was one of them that really just... It wasn't a specific instance that fricked with my mind, it was like the entire episode, or multiple scenes of an entire episode that really just fricked with my mind. I couldn't determine what was real and what wasn't, and what was manipulation, or what was, you know, possibility. Like, I don't know, because it could have gone either way. I mean, honestly, if it was any other character, I probably would have said, no, that hand puppet thing is absolutely sentient. I know I'm really bad at this. If it was any other character, I would have been like, no, it's an all different being. It's like some sort of ghosty spirit or alien or something like that. But because it was Cartman, I honestly didn't know. Like, again, it is entirely possible that Mitch Connor was his or its. I'm just gonna refer to Mitch Connor as an it. Honestly, like it could have been its own thing. I don't know. Anything is possible. This again, it's a South Park universe, but it's also Cartman. Like, even though at the very end of the episode he was like nah, 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 to Kyle when Kyle admitted that it could be a possibility. Like, you know, Cartman was all, you know, yeah, but like, I don't know. I still have doubts. I don't know. I don't. I actually think I kind of forgot a little bit of another interesting little tidbit too, is the creators, since, I mean, I didn't even think, or maybe I did I mention it or did I not? I don't exactly remember, but it was like, you know, South Park, the animation style is super simplistic, and it's kind of by design. I mean, I can't necessarily say exactly why, but I feel like it is by design for a reason. I just haven't really contemplated that reason, but not the point. The point being is that it's a very simple design of the characters and the universe and the settings and stuff in general. But then when you get the hand movements in, it's not just the movements, but it's the angle at which you're looking at it. It's the potential clothes or accessories the hand puppet may have, and the creators admitted that it was a little bit tricky in some instances, and hey, I can't blame them. That looked like it wasn't necessarily easy given how different it was from their usual style of animation. I mean, I draw myself, and jeez, I mean, my style isn't really simplistic. I mean, compared to plenty of other styles I've seen, yeah, it might be a little bit simplistic. It's not like stick figure, even South Park simplistic. It's a slight bit more detailed than that, but not much more, honestly. I don't draw people very often for a reason. Although I've actually been practicing a little lately and getting a little bit better compared to what I was, like, 5 years ago. But anyways, but even I know that, going from something like, like a simple human bodily figure and then trying to draw friggin' hands and feet in certain shapes or whatever, it's really hard, and it can be complicated, especially if you're not used to it. But you gotta give props to the South Park creators and editors and the staff involved with, making that happen, because it actually did look pretty good, even though, again, hands, the four, you can never really tell, 4 or 5 fingers on characters, and they're just little stubs or something like that, or it's like this instead of this for the adults. It's just like that was terrible. I apologize, but you guys get the point that I'm trying to make. I can't imagine trying to do something like that in an animation style. It looks crazy. But one thing is definitely for sure, I'd be shocked if this concept or even the character wasn't explored more in future episodes. Like, maybe a lot, maybe only a couple. I honestly don't even know. But I would really like to see this kind of concept explored a little bit more, only because it's Cartman. Because, again, there's the possibility that he is controlling this hand puppet thingamabob, but there's also the possibility that it's sentient in its own right. Don't get me wrong, it was a bit of a mind frickery, but if I could see it again in a different context, it might give me a better idea of knowing whether or not this character could be sentient, or if it's just Cartman manipulating everybody, because that's what Cartman is. That's how he does things. That's who he is. Like, but I don't know, because either is possible. Again, it's Cartman, but it's also the South Park universe. I swear I've said that multiple times already, and I do apologize, but it was just... That's all I can say. It's all I can say. I would like to see it. I would like to see it explored, even just once more. Even just once more. I mean, because again, there's like 16 still more seasons. Bro, soon to be 17. There's definitely time and room to be exploring this, even in just one other episode. I've got to see something. I've got to see something, because this is a really interesting concept that, again, it messed with my thought process, but not in the same way as others that have really boggled my mind. Some of them had just boggled my mind just cause, but this one seems like it could have potential to go in another direction. It could expand on that particular concept or story, whatever you want to call it. I don't exactly know, but it is really interesting to think about. So, we shall see. I got a long ways to go, so who knows? Maybe I'll say something, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll be disappointed, but whatever. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna end that review there before I start yawning more. Okay. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review, and I hope my reaction was entertaining as well. And as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 6, Lil Crime Stoppers. Not Little Crime Stoppers, Lil Crime Stoppers. So as usual, if you want to see the reaction, the link to that is going to be down in the description below, but if you're here for the review, then you have come to the right place. Now on to a quick recap of the episode. The boys are basically playing junior detective, and eventually they kind of get like, you know, official like junior detective badges from the police department, so they are actually doing some more serious work. Like at first they were doing, you know, minor crime stuff like who stole my pie kind of thing, but eventually, as soon as they become junior detectives, the police captain, or I forget what his name is already, is kind of just like, okay, we got a narcotics ring, go take care of it. And the boys, shockingly unarmed, manage to deal with it, but it causes a lot of property damage and they get reprimanded for it. And so eventually they're like, or the police captain is like, okay, well, there's this guy at this strip club who is connected to the narcotic ring meth lab thing that was taken care of earlier, and they're still unarmed, but they still managed to get out of it alive. But, you know, the people involved in the meth ring or meth lab thing, whatever it was, as well as a couple of corrupt cops, don't make it out alive. And, you know, the boys are offered positions as full-on detectives, and the boys are like, oh, no, thank you. So they just return to sort of playing as laundromat owners or laundromat workers or whatever, kind of like they were doing before. Wow, that was actually really short. I'm actually kind of proud of it. No, kind of not really, but I'm still proud of myself that I managed to do it all in one go. I know that for the longest time initially, I was just kind of like watching the episode like, oh my gosh, why are you offering these boys actual junior detective positions and then detective positions, and then just making it more complicated and sending them into situations, dangerous situations? I don't like, that's the only thing that was going through my mind at the time. But then once I had a moment to pause, and, you know, once I ended the reaction and stuff and actually had a little more time to think about it, I'm like, well, in a lot of ways, it's basically like a parody in of itself of the CSI effect, which is something I've talked about. I have a video about it in my channel. It's from a little while ago, but it still has some relevance. Heck, I'll even go ahead and link that down in the description below too. I actually do have a video about the CSI effect. I'm not even joking about this. One of the creators, I don't exactly remember which one it was mentioning in the commentary for this episode something about, you know, having like a little like detective set when he was a kid or something like that. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of get that, because I'm sure a lot of people would kind of be like, oh, we're gonna play police officer, we're gonna play detective when we're kids, we're gonna play zookeeper, doctor. You know, we always did stuff like that as kids. We would always pretend to be something that, you know, adults were, that we couldn't be, kind of thing. And, you know, sometimes people, and kids too, thought that the life of a detective was so freaking cool. They got to see and do so many cool things. But, and of course, you know, thinking about how this episode went initially, I'm just like, you know what? This is exactly what happens to people who watch, like, you know, crime dramas and crime shows and stuff like that. And I was also thinking, because at this point, CSI was not only airing, but it was starting to get really popular around this time. Because when was this season released? Like 2003, maybe 2002. 2002, 3, or 4. I don't exactly remember, but it was the early 2000s. It was, again, because the first episode of CSI was released in 2001, and by the time that this episode was probably aired, I think it's 03. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't exactly remember the dates for like seasons, but by that time, CSI, the show, would have started gaining a lot more popularity. It would have been in full swing, and it makes sense that, you know, there'd probably be a parody of it by South Park around this time frame. And, you know, when I was thinking about, you know, looking back on what the episode was, I'm like, oh yeah, this is absolutely just like a sort of parody or riff of not only the show itself, but even the effect that it causes. Like, again, some people don't even think the CSI effect necessarily exists. I personally do, because I was kind of affected by it myself. I partially went into forensics because I found interest in the crime dramas, but I also kind of knew that the science was way over exaggerated. Even I knew back then. I didn't know how over exaggerated, but oh, I found out. But it's like people in general, and the boys too, as like sort of as stand-ins for us in the real world. They think that the lives of, you know, CSIs and police officers and detectives are just so freaking cool. They're so epic. There's like they can help people and do such good things, but it's so over exaggerated. Like, the life of anyone in the law enforcement industry is not an easy one. The things that they have to do, the things that they have to deal with, the things that they have to see, like, I've heard plenty of stories, and I've seen plenty of pictures too from various professors of mine that I had in college. I mean, one in particular, but a couple of others as well. Like, I've seen what they've had to do for sometimes decades. Like, they've had to see these terrible things and just deal with terrible people, and, you know, sometimes, like, just from outside and from within. Like, sometimes they do, like, some departments do have to deal with corrupt individuals. Like, you know, it's unfortunate, but it happens. But it's just so blown out of proportion. People expect it to be so cool, when in reality, that couldn't be farther from the truth. And yet, even despite knowing that, and like being fully aware of that, hearing all these stories and paying attention to what everybody has told me in the past, what I've learned, what I've seen in pictures, and I still want to do it. I still want to become a CSI or a forensic technician eventually. And again, despite knowing everything that I do, I still want to do it. And of course, people's expectations nowadays are a lot different now that the CSI effect has kind of been cleared up a little bit, and people are a little more familiar with, oh, maybe I don't want to be a police officer or detective or CSI or whatever it is. Like, people are a little more aware, but back then, especially in the early to mid and even kind of in the late 2000s, people didn't know. They had no clue. I mean, I was still pretty young, so that's a little bit different. I probably wouldn't have really started knowing until I was, you know, in the beginning to the mid 2010s, like, so that's a little bit different for me. But people really honestly had no idea what it was like. And that absolutely shows in, like, you know, the boys' perceptions of what happens throughout the entirety of this episode. And I didn't even get to mention the little bits about, you know, the boys being detectives, and then there being some other kids who are playing FBI with, you know, nicer toys and stuff, and, you know, asserting their jurisdictional superiority and maybe a little bit of personal privilege as well over the boys, because they're just detectives. They're not FBI, which, I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate because the FBI do what they want. They're a pretty big governmental power for a reason. But beyond, again, not the point. But it's so interesting to see the boys, like, to see their personalities, like, get degraded and eaten away at over time, because that is absolutely what happens in the real world. People's expectations just crumble once they're actually in that job, in those kinds of positions of, you know, whether it's law enforcement or forensics or anything of the sort. People just don't understand. I'm about to sneeze. Hold on. But yeah, just kind of watching the boys, you know, watching them do their job, and then just be constantly, like, you know, beaten down by it. I mean, if you kind of think about it, that similar things usually tend to happen in, like, you know, say Marine or Army or Navy, like, you know, the training camps, the boot camps, stuff like that. Like, but again, jobs in, like, law enforcement or even related to law enforcement are just very different. And yeah. Again, there's just not too much more to say about that. Like, people don't realize what kind of effect that has on you, and there are plenty of people in those kinds of professions that do take their job very seriously. They do not take it lightly, and it can take a toll on them and their families, and when, of course, I remember seeing the scene when Cartman came in and he started, like, you know, talking to his mom, and quite in a sort of, not really hostile tone, but a very aggressive kind of tone, and even frustrated, like, even he admitted towards the end of their conversation. But, and I was just looking at that thinking, accurate. That is so accurate. Like, sometimes jobs like those they take they require so much time and work out of you. It takes so much time out of your days, and it can get frustrating over time, and sometimes the effects it has on especially your relationships with, say, the people that you live with can be really stressful in a way that I think a lot of people don't quite understand. If you live with someone who knows what it's like to work in law enforcement or forensics or similar careers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of you who don't know, or maybe there are those of you who do know and you do have a family member who maybe you live with or are close to who does work in that kind of profession but you don't understand it, just people have got to keep this in mind, that those kinds of jobs are incredibly stressful. And granted, I don't necessarily have personal experience, I don't have necessarily expert experience on this. Like, I did work with a sheriff's department for a long time. I saw the inner workings of sheriff's departments, and a couple of my professors were working with law enforcement or in forensics departments for a very long time. So I've experienced a little, but heard even more stories about what it's like. And people need to understand that these kinds of jobs are not easy, and they're not always built for, people they're not necessarily built for people who always want to start families and stuff like that. It just depends on who you are as a person and the dynamic of the family in general. And I'm not saying that you have to excuse every bit of behavior. Like, trust me, there are plenty of individuals in law enforcement who, law enforcement or forensic. I'm just gonna say law enforcement at this point before I just start tooting my own horn over and over again. But people who work in any kind of law enforcement related position sometimes have trouble coping, and so might create their own coping mechanisms. It can be one of many things, really. Sometimes a common one can be alcoholism, which we all know is pretty dangerous. Again, some people will even get corrupt and, start going against what their departments, or whether it's for selfish ambition or out of fear, who knows. Like, there are all kinds of reasons that people may not do the right thing, or there are all kinds of coping mechanisms, both positive and negative. But these kinds of jobs are never easy. They are never easy. And again, it's not to say that they should be excused for all their behavior. I am obviously not saying that, but especially if you know somebody close to you who is in a profession like that, and they may not be having a good day most of the time. It just kind of all depends on how well that people in those professions take it, as well as the support and the family or friend dynamic that they have with other people. Like, obviously they can't be excused for everything, but they still need their support, because again, and these aren't the only kinds of jobs that can be very stressful too, but they can definitely be very high up there. All the paperwork, you have to deal with various members of the department, and just the sheer amount of work that you have to do in general. Again, I don't necessarily have really a lot of personal experience, but again, I have heard plenty of people talk about stuff like this just over and over again, because, we, as in a sense civilians, we don't understand, and most of us never will. But that doesn't mean we can't try to at least sympathize, because what happened to what happened to the boys with how they were just eaten away over time, that happens in real life all the time. You guys would be surprised. So I'm gonna stop here before I ramble any further. I definitely feel very strongly about stuff like this, but it was kind of nice to talk about it. I hope maybe some of you took what I said to heart, because again, looking back, it really is a good episode, and it really does convey something that a lot of people don't think about. So, but yeah, I'm just gonna take a time out. I'm gonna end it there before I ramble on. I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction and this review, and honestly, looking back, I really did like this episode. I liked how much it parodied and riffed on, the actual experience of being in law enforcement and the show CSI and the CSI Effect. I love how it parodied that because it just did it really well in my opinion. But thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 7, Red Man's Greed. So, if you're looking for the reaction, the link is going to be down in the description below, but let's go ahead and get started with the review, or at least, more specifically, the recap part of the review, which I've actually been pretty good at getting it relatively short lately, so let's go. And actually, before I start the recap, let me just say, I called it in my reaction, the parody of, let's just say I called it. I so called it. The boys and their families, or most of their families I think, end up going to a casino on an Indian reservation, so it's basically a Native American casino on an Indian reservation, or Native American v. Indian. It's friggin' Native American. I gotta remember to differentiate the two because there's a serious difference between the two. Anyways, it's a Native American casino on a Native American reservation, and, you know, Gerald, Kyle's dad, ends up gambling and betting a lot of money. So there is that. And then the owner of the casino was basically like, well, we're just gonna go ahead and buy South Park so we can make a freeway so that we can get more traffic, therefore more profit. And they're just chanting like, ha 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 ha. And I'm just like, oh my god. I'm just like, wow. Just playing just right into that stereotype. Just like that. But of course the town is bought and everybody's like, okay, well I guess we gotta leave now, and the boys are like, no, we gotta help save our town. So eventually because of them, like everybody else in town starts being like, you cannot take away our land, you rich arrogant fools cannot take away our home and our land and stuff. And so the casino people basically respond by, you know, taking a bunch of Chinese men and infecting and like, you know, rubbing them all over blankets infected with SARS and then giving the blankets to the people. And of course pretty much everybody gets sick except for Stan and a couple of other kids, I think, or something like that. But it's like, it's not deadly enough, but Stan is still like, okay, well I'm gonna find out what's needed to cure SARS. And so it's just like chicken noodle soup and Sprite and some Dayquil and NyQuil and stuff like that, and pretty much everybody's okay. But then the casino owner's son contracts SARS, and he's like, you know, begging the South Park people, save my son, and so they do, because their herbs and medicines can't really do anything. And so eventually, casino owner is like, okay, fine, you can have your town back, here's the title of the town, I'll give you the bag, they'll give that back to you. And I feel like I'm forgetting something. No, I don't think I forgot anything. But let me just say right now, I called it. I so called it in my reaction exactly what it was a parody of. It was basically a parody of the Americans basically forcing the Native Americans off their land when they started colonizing the continent. And I mean, I say they, even though it was kind of we, but technically I was there, so it was still they, so it can't be we, but it was also kind of we in a sort of a metaphorical sense, but that's not the point. But again, there is still the point that I basically called it. It was just, because instead of Americans trying to force the Native Americans off their land, it was the Native Americans forcing the Americans out of their land, out of South Park, even though it technically was originally Native American land, but then became American land, so now the Native... No. I'm just gonna confuse myself if I keep talking like that. Just stick with me. But you guys get the parody that it was going for. So there is that. And then of course I totally forgot that there was a SARS outbreak right around this time, which funny enough, well, actually I'll talk a little more on that in a bit, but there was a SARS outbreak, I want to say in like 02 to 03 or 02 to 04, and it wasn't necessarily terribly deadly, as kind of reflecting the fact that, you know, Stan's father Randy was like, all of us are sick, but 98% of us will survive. You must go forward. So it wasn't terribly deadly, but it clearly affected a lot of people. Like, you know, understandably so. Like, epidemics are certainly no fun. We are definitely living in one now. We all know this. But the funny part that I totally forgot is that SARS is caused by a coronavirus variant. I totally forgot about that, because if you don't know what SARS is, it's severe acute respiratory syndrome, I believe is what it is. It just causes a lot of distress to the respiratory system, and it's especially bad for, say, babies. It's like SARS, MRSA, and a couple of other things that are really dangerous to get in your babies because they can get really sick from it really easily. I'm pretty sure that's it's SARS, MRSA, and a few others. But it is absolutely funny because SARS is basically caused by a coronavirus variant, which is what caused the outbreak in the early 2000s, but it's a new strain of it that's causing our current outbreak, which I'm sorry to say is just funny to think about in so many ways, that I happen to be watching this particular episode in the time that we're having a new strain of the same virus basically break out in an epidemic. Like, can anybody see the irony in that? Okay, I don't know if that's necessarily ironic, but can anybody at least see a little bit of humor in that? And, you know, if you have had someone who has had coronavirus and hasn't survived, then I do apologize for making that joke, but you do have to realize the irony and the strange coincidentalness of that situation. You have to realize that, right? Come on. And then, of course, you know, initially I was like, oh, they're using Chinese men for SARS? Well, that's kind of where the SARS outbreak started, was frickin' China. Shocker. It's the coronavirus. Are we really surprised? And then, you know, just thinking about putting two and two together, I'm like, oh, that's why they use Chinese people. That makes a lot more sense, and that actually makes it a little funnier. And I'm sorry that it's humorous, but it really is. I'm sorry, but it is. And this was actually something that I was a little bit more familiar of myself. I like studying some bits of history, so I do kind of know stuff, some things here and there. But the whole using the biologically virus infected blankets or whatever is pretty much the exact same kind of warfare tactic that was used in oh, I'm already forgetting the name. Fort Pitt, which is basically Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania now, where somebody basically took what was it at the time? Was it smallpox? I think it was like smallpox infected items to trade with the Native Americans who are kind of battling back for control of their land. This was like pre-Revolutionary War times. This was mid 1700s, I want to say. Again, it's been a while since I've read up on some things, but I'm pretty sure it was like mid 1700s or maybe a little bit after, but it was definitely pre-Revolutionary War times where some individuals and soldiers took some like blankets and a couple other things laced with smallpox to give them to the Native Americans, hoping that an outbreak would start. And I think a small outbreak started, but not a significant one. But, and, you know, I kind of like knew about it, but then rewatching this episode, I was like, oh, that's what that was referencing. I kind of like history. Recent history, a lot less so. But further back, I tend to be a lot more interested. If we're talking ancient history, I'm definitely very interested. So if there's ever any references to ancient history, I'll usually get them really fast or know a lot more details, like say in reviews and stuff. But the whole thing with the SARS, though, I can't believe I actually had to do research on that because I totally forgot that SARS was caused by coronavirus. I totally forgot. But I'm sorry, it just really is funny, but I mean, granted, those stuff I didn't necessarily get, like, right off the bat or anything, but even immediately after the reaction, I absolutely called the parody with the Americans forcing the Native Americans off their land. Basically, the role reversal was what this episode was. It was so interesting. And it was one of those things where, like, I was sure that I had gotten the parody immediately, and then upon looking into it a little bit more and, you know, hearing some commentary about it, I'm just like, I knew it, ow, that hurt. Ow, that actually kind of hurt. Honestly, more than anything, I was just really happy to be able to get a parody or a reference, like, pretty much immediately. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 8, South Park is Gay. I almost completely forgot the name of the episode. I am positive that this is probably a reaction that you guys have been looking forward to. And maybe the review as well. Even if you don't necessarily watch all these reviews, you might want to listen because I actually have a few interesting things to say about this particular episode. Anyways, the link to the actual reaction is going to be down in the description below, but let's just recap quick, if we can. So, because of a recent TV show, there's a sort of metrosexual fad that's been going on all around South Park, and Kyle is a little tardy to the party, similar with Chimpokemon. And there's a reason I call that episode out specifically, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. And so, the other boys, being Stan, Kenny and Cartman, try and get Kyle to sort of join the fad with them, but Kyle's like, but I don't want to. He actually ends up even getting beaten up and stuff over it, and he's just like, screw this TV show. So he starts to devise some plans. And then, of course, meanwhile, the women of South Park are actually starting to be like, oh, our boys are actually taking care of themselves, and they're brushing their teeth, and they're being nice and stuff like that. And the women are like, oh yeah, this seems fine, but then the guys become increasingly like, egocentric, that's not quite the word that I'm looking for, like self-absorbed, and they start like putting themselves on higher pedestals, and it's just, the women are just like, okay, what's going on? And then Mr. Garrison and Mr. Slave have been noticing this and like, ooh, more gays, but then they're like, no, these are just straight men trying to imitate gays. They're trying to take away our culture and stuff. So, you know, later on, it is a combination of Kyle, Mr. Garrison, and Mr. Slave, who basically go to New York to confront these TV stars and be like, no, we don't want this metrosexual fad, I mean, for whatever reasons. And, you know, but you know, nothing seems to work no matter what they say. They initially try and kill the TV stars, but it doesn't work, but then they try talking their ears off, but that doesn't work also. And then Mr. Garrison's like, wait, you guys aren't gay or anything like that. And then it's revealed that the TV stars are crab people. The three are caught by the crab people and are kind of turned into crab people, but then all the women and the wives and stuff come to New York and kill the guys, well, the crab people in gay guy disguise or whatever it is, and then eventually the fad kind of ends. And, yeah. This episode pretty much broke me. But I'm not going to talk about the crab people just yet. I'll get to that later. So one of the things that I did talk a little bit about during my reaction, I don't necessarily know if it was the point of the episode, like a couple of other random things, but like one of the big point, or like something that really hit me that I kind of connected with was, you know, like the metrosexual fad, or just kind of fads in general, how because of this, the people, the guys rather, the men, the fathers, the boys, except for Kyle, but more on that later, we're all basically accepting this new reality of the metrosexual commonplace fad, or whatever the frick it was, but they were also kind of losing their individuality in the process. I absolutely am a huge supporter of everyone being of being individual, being themselves. Like, even if they, might, take some bits and pieces from, friends or family, whether it's, how you act or what you do with certain things, maybe even with, random things, like, how you write and how you draw and how you talk to people, or, how you drive, like, all kinds of things. Like, you might pick bits and pieces from somewhere else, but eventually it just kind of becomes your own unique individual personality. And I've always been like, okay, well, I won't say supporter, but I've always believed in individuality and stuff like that. And this episode just completely flipped that around and being like, nope, metrosexual's the new fad now. And then, of course, Mr. Garrison also made a point where it's like, you metrosexuals are kind of making us gays lose our culture, and I could kind of see where he was coming from. It's like, these guys are just pretending, but they're not really, but they're like embracing the sort of gay culture, like the metrosexuals were sort of embracing the gay culture without really trying to understand it, which was the biggest problem. They were just trying, like, they were just, becoming metrosexuals or whatever, but they weren't actually trying to understand, the sort of gay culture that was sort of becoming a slight bit more prevalent around that time period, maybe? I don't exactly remember what time frames were with, like, things like the gay culture and the LGBTQ culture and stuff like that. And LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTQA, or like, there's too many freaking letters. I usually, my go-to is usually LGBT. Sometimes I'll say the Q as well. I don't know why, like, I just do. But, crap, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, that happens sometimes. I apologize. But no, I could definitely see why Mr. Garrison was getting a little bit, antsy with, people in a way kind of pretending to be gays without actually being gay, and like what was it? I think the TV show I don't even remember what the TV show in South Park was called. It was parroting something else, another actual TV show around the same time of a same name or similar name or something like that. I don't exactly remember, but it was interesting because I think the creators mentioned in their commentary how they, or maybe they talked to someone who was like, yeah, I don't, who was gay, who was like, yeah, I don't like that show because it's like, we have our own, we are our own people, we have our own culture for a reason, and we just, like, or something to that effect. And no, that doesn't even sound completely right, so I'm just not going to go any further into that because I think I've confused myself now. But the point is that I can understand where Mr. Garrison is coming from. Like, like, you can't just insert all kinds of, gay jokes into, like, a lot of comedy shows, like what was happening at the time. Like, you can't just do that all the frigging time, because, it's, especially nowadays, it's definitely its own culture, and it's sort of almost branched out into all different kinds of things. Okay, now I just really need to stop talking about this particular point, but what I said initially is what I was trying to get at, but what I eventually rambled on to, I'm not sure what it was necessarily. I might have been ranting to a little bit of confusion, so I apologize for that. Let's just get on to something else. Let's get on to Kyle, actually. I definitely want to talk about him. Once I had gotten over the sort of ending twist of the episode, and once I'd actually taken some time to take a break and, rethink, I immediately started thinking about Kyle. And I mentioned it in one of my reviews as well, in a previous episode. I think it was the third episode, Toilet Paper, where I thought that he was, of the four boys at least, the most attuned with his emotions, because he was the only one to really get guilty initially without any, solid reasoning, like, Stan and Kenny did eventually as well, but that was after seeing somebody else about to pay for their toilet paper crime. But Kyle got emotional and he got guilty almost immediately, and it's interesting because this is the second instance, for sure that I can think of, the second instance in the entire series that I have seen thus far, where Kyle is behind on a new fad or a new thing that's going on, but then he but then he necessarily can't keep up and ends up going to extremes. To either whatever kind of extreme it is, but he gets behind on some kind of fad that's going on, and then eventually ends up going to extremes. I called out Chimpokemon earlier because he did the exact same thing in a very different way. Like, he was behind on the Chimpokemon fad, and like, you know, with getting the actual game and then getting the Chimpokemon and then the game itself, or maybe it was the other way around. And then he was eventually like, okay, well, I want to get this stuff, and otherwise I'm gonna blow shit up. He absolutely went to an emotional extreme. And it was a similar situation with this, where he was behind on the metrosexual fad, but he was like, but I still want to be myself. And so he ends up getting beaten up, and he's like, okay, well, it's time to go to New York and kill a TV show, guys. Yeah. Okay, I'm not even gonna try to imitate that noise because that's just not gonna be smart for me. But it's interesting that this is the second instance where this has happened, because again, it's prominent. Like, there's some new fad going on that everybody's getting behind, and this one was a lot more prominent because it was affecting more than just children. But there was a fad he was getting behind, and he eventually kind of started going to extremes. He started getting super emotional and went to extremes, whether it was blowing people up with huge weapons or trying to kill some TV personalities. But, I mean, either way, extremes nonetheless. And it's interesting to see that I think my initial idea about Kyle being the most attuned to his emotions, being the most emotional in a sense, may have actually been correct. Because, again, I was talking about it in the toilet paper episode, and then now that I've seen this, and its similar, I guess you could say, storyline, in terms of Kyle's character, in terms of storyline between this episode and Chimpokemon, and again, the whole thing with the previous toilet paper, as well as a couple of other random instances that I was thinking about as well, I'm like, I may actually be right, that he's probably the most attuned with his emotions. And not saying that Carmen really isn't, for the most part. But not to say that the others aren't, but Kyle definitely seems to be the most emotional of the four, which, I mean, it can lead to some positive empathy. It probably explains why he's the one who gets most pissed off at Cartman more often than Stan and Kenny do. But I think that that's a huge part of his character, and it's interesting to see how this dynamic works amongst them. Like, it kind of makes me think a little bit more about the characters themselves. Because, you know, you got Cartman, who's the master manipulator. You got Stan, who I honestly think is kind of the moral compass of the group. You got Kenny, who's sort of the outsider who will do anything, really. Whether it's for attention or just because he's been with these kids for so long that, you know, it's just the way they do things. But then you also got Kyle, who tends to be the most emotional and, in a way, sometimes the most irrational as a result. And not saying that that happens all the time, but I've started noticing now that I really was thinking about him as a character. It seems to happen a lot more often with him being a bit irrational than it does with some of the other characters. And again, usually for different reasons too, but I think he often tends to get the most irrational and tends to jump to conclusions the most because of his emotions, because of how emotional he can get, especially with some of the negative emotions. Like, he can get frustrated and pissed off and sad, like, far more easily than some of the other characters. And again, like, I wouldn't have talked about him so much if I hadn't already mentioned it a little bit in the toilet paper episode review, but now I'm mentioning it here because I think that there's a point, like, I feel like I'm on the right track. Like, I feel like I'm really starting to, like, think about the characters and explore, like, what they are, maybe even what they represent. I don't exactly know for sure, but it's just something I had to bring up because, again, I've mentioned something similar to it so recently that I felt like I had to talk a little bit more about it because I'm like, was I right? Because I don't normally notice stuff like this. But I kind of did this time. And I was shocked to find that I might have been right. So I'm not entirely sure. I may try and look for it a little bit more now, to see if maybe I could, because I think I am right, but to make sure to sort of confirm that I probably am right about this. But, and of course I've also been contemplating about making some kind of, South Park character review episode where I try and like analyze and dig into a bunch of the characters so far. Probably not until like the end of the 7th season, because it's just an easier time frame for me to work with. But I'm just surprised I'm already I don't necessarily know if it's something like, I should have figured this out by now, I'm 7 seasons in, or if it's like, have I really figured out this much in 7 seasons? Like, I don't know which side of the fence I should be on, but whatever the case. So the first major point was something I'd already talked a little bit about in the reaction, and the second was a point I wanted to reaffirm from a previous review. But the third point is just a quick little, WTF, because probably one of the big reasons a lot of you would be happy that I watched this episode was the crab people. Crab people. I'm still trying to figure that out. How does one even conceive an idea like that? How? Though, to be fair, I did watch the really short commentary that the creators had on this, and apparently it was one of those things where like they were trying to come up with ideas and it was kind of last minute, and they were like, let's try and think of smart ideas. Okay, let's try and think of dumb ideas. And somebody apparently said crab people, so that's kind of what they went with. And it's one of those, they kind of talked about it as being like one of those ideas that's so dumb it's cool kind of things. And don't get me, who cares what people might say? Do I necessarily think it's dumb? I'm not entirely sure. Do I think it's weird and crazy? Absolutely. But this is what I've come to expect from South Park lately. It just goes in directions that I just don't expect at all, that I don't see coming. Like, how does one even... whether it's a smart or dumb idea, whether it gets published or not, how in the heck do you come up with crab people? How? If you haven't seen my reaction, you have to see my reaction to this particular aspect of this episode, because you can just see it on my face. I'm just blown away by what happened. Granted, there have been some episodes that have really fricked with my mind. This episode screwed up my thought process, I think, more than any other episode. Some have been weird, but this just came out of freaking nowhere, and that's saying something for South Park. Granted, I still have a bunch more seasons to watch and catch up on, but holy shite. Just... I don't know how this kind of idea could have possibly been conceived, but it really was a dumb idea that somehow ended up working in a weird sort of way. I don't know. I really don't, even I could not have conceived that kind of idea in any of my stories that I've written or come up with. Even I could not have conceived a crazy idea like that. It's just mind-boggling, and it's just so random. It comes out of nowhere. I feel like with almost any other TV show, it wouldn't have worked. But because it's South Park, because of what we've seen it do with all of its characters, all of its weirdness, all of its plot twists that it's I feel like it could work. I don't exactly know. I mentioned this with a previous thing, how it's like, I'd like to see a little bit more about Carmen's hand puppet thingamabob, to confirm some ideas that I have, or kind of like how I was even just talking about Kyle, and how I'd like to see more plots kind of like this to confirm my theories or my ideas or whatever. I don't know how to feel about this. It's one of those things where I'd be interested if it came up, if crab people came up again, but I'd also wouldn't be sad if it didn't, because it's just that bizarre. there's just no rhyme or reason to explain why that even exists in a South Park episode. Stop. Okay. I think I'm all yawned out, but it doesn't matter because I need to end this review anyways, because those were the 3 main points that I wanted to talk about. I know I talked about Kyle for a while, but I really did want to get my thoughts out there because I thought they were really important. Because again, I was just talking about him in a review not too long ago. So yes. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stop myself from rambling any further, because again, I've already talked about 3 major points, kind of in depth, a little more than I think I needed to, but whatever. It's why I do these reviews. I need to stop saying that, but I'm gonna continue to say that because these reviews are never rehearsed. I just kind of have a general idea of what I want to say, and then I just kind of say it. And sometimes just ramble on and go on much deeper than maybe I initially thought I might, or maybe more than I thought I would intend, or sometimes I even start rambling on and then I'm like, oh crap, what was the original point? Kind of like I did with the first point, with the whole, yeah, technically, okay, now that I think about it, technically I kind of covered 4 points with the whole individuality, and then, you know, the thing with Mr. Garrison, and then Kyle, and the crab people. Okay, so maybe it was kind of 4. So I guess the second is what I'm talking about, where I kind of started talking and it was making sense, but then I started rambling and I was like, wait, I don't fully know what I'm talking about. I should stop while I can, because I think I have a bad habit of doing that. But I at least want to try and make some of these not the reactions, but I at least want to try and make some of these reviews a bit more genuine, I guess you could say. I mean, maybe it would benefit me if I had a little bit more of a script, but sometimes it's like I plan to say something, but then I'm like, oh, that's right, I wanted to talk about this too, or it's like, oh, that's right, I want to mention this little thing too. Like, I can't always plan for stuff like that, so I feel like if it comes to me, and if it comes to me and it comes out kind of more naturally, then maybe I can get my thoughts out a little bit better. Maybe that's the whole thought process. I don't exactly know. Whatever the case. I'm done. Shutting up now. So thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the reaction, and I hope you enjoyed the review as well, because I really did have a lot to talk about. And as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 9, Christian Rock Hard. Wow, I managed to actually get that right on the first try. Yippee! So, as usual, this is just going to be the review of this particular video, but if you're looking for the reaction, the link is going to be down in the description below, and I think I've got to go on to the recap of the episode, which I think should be relatively short, so here we go. Basically, the boys have started a band, but they're not entirely sure what kind of music they should play, so Cartman suggests Christian rock, and everybody's like, no way, so they basically kick him out, and there's a competition between Cartman and the other 3 boys on if Cartman is going to win a Platinum Album Award or something like that, and so Cartman decides to form a band with Butters and Token doing Christian rock. Oh, Christian rock, wow, Cartman decided to go with that. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny are trying to illegally download some stuff to get a feel for what they might do, but then are basically kind of shown, oh, this is what happens to people who illegally download content. The artists actually lose money because, you know, people aren't buying their songs and their albums and stuff, so they decide to strike and, you know, say, until nobody can no longer illegally download music or something like that, we're not going to be making any more music. And meanwhile, Cartman is basically taking all different kinds of songs, like poppy love songs and stuff like that, and just switching around a few words and then just making those up for him and Butters and Token, and it actually starts to get really successful, unfortunately. And there are a whole bunch of artists who do strike with Stan, Kyle, and Kenny, but it's like, oh, but Cartman is selling so well that there's like this whole event and concert or whatever in honor of the new Christian rock band, which is named Faith Plus One, if I'm recalling correctly. But anyways, Cartman's band has sold a whole bunch of albums, but there's technically no Platinum Album Award in the Christian rock genre, so he kind of gets super mad because he thought he won the bet, but turns out he didn't. And he says 2 words, the F word and Jesus. And everybody's like, nope, I'm out. And Token actually beats the shit out of him, and even Butters kind of gets his moment as well. I was kind of mentioning it towards the end of the reaction, but I eventually realized that I was kind of surprised that it took this long for somebody to get Cartman back, basically. Like, seriously, Token beat the literal shite out of Cartman. It was just a couple of punches, but Cartman was like on the freaking ground, and even Butters was, farted on his face and, flipped him off. I was just like, it took that long? It took like 7.5 seasons for something like that to happen? What in the heck? And I even mentioned, too, at the end of my reaction, that about time that Cartman got what he deserved. And, there are plenty of people that will probably disagree with my opinion on that. He's very integral to the show, and, and he's just such an important character, and they're, But anyways, it's just one of those things where it's like Cartman is one of the main characters of the show. Like, why do I dislike him so much? Well, I mean, frankly, who freaking wouldn't? And here's the thing. I dislike every one of them for a different reason. Sometimes they're usually just small, reasons. But as an extremely moral individual, Cartman's negative personality traits that I see just irk me so much. So it's just nice to see him finally get, for some of the other characters to finally get some payback on him. So that's why I can appreciate stuff like that, because, yes, Cartman is a main character, and frankly, South Park would not exist without him. The town, the concept of that show would not exist without him. There's a reason that he's a part of the show, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, he is a main character, and, as a character, he's definitely needed, he's definitely entertaining in his own way, but at the same time, he's still got plenty of negative personality traits that just bother me seeing in regular people, so, hey, what can you do? But for that particular episode, I didn't necessarily have too much commentary on it, probably because I was a slight bit tired, but there were a couple of little things that I did definitely notice. The big one, and this big idea is kind of a lead to the second part, but the big one relating to, illegal downloading of music and TV and movies and stuff like that, which was really starting to become prevalent around this time, especially as the internet was starting to pick up, I guess you could say. I remember so many DVDs, definitely a bunch of DVDs that I had when I was younger, where they would have those, you guys know what I mean, those ads, those really loud, and, I'll play a small clip of it because you guys have to know exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, those loud and obnoxious advertisements about, illegal downloading and stuff like that. They were starting to become a lot more prevalent, not just on DVDs, but even a little bit on television as well. Because, again, it was starting to become a lot more prevalent, which kind of leads me into my second point, which was, copyright infringement and stuff like that, which it seems like the two subjects aren't necessarily related, but they kind of are in their own way, because kind of like Cartman did in the entire episode, where he was basically sort of, but not really, taking music from somebody else, in a sense, illegally downloading it and just switching around a few things for his own benefit, for his own band. And especially in this day and age, with YouTube itself, you will have videos that are blocked for infringing on somebody else's copyright, or whatever the proper phrasing is. I can't think of what the proper phrasing is right now, but I remember having to deal with it a bunch when I was first starting a lot of my reactions for my YouTube channel, especially with the South Park reactions. It's why I instead changed them from highlights to full reactions on, a third-party site. And a lot of people do the exact same thing, because, I can understand it's YouTube, YouTube is being YouTube, but, and, yeah. Even as an artist and a writer myself, I'm a little bit aware of copyright infringement. I have to make sure that the characters and the stories and the ideas and the concepts I'm creating are just, they're coming out of my own imagination. I can't just be stealing them from somewhere else. Granted, there are plenty of my stories where I'll take, this idea or little bits and pieces of concepts from other stories. It's frankly how most authors will write their stories. They take little bits and pieces from other established works, but you can't just necessarily take it all in and then just make a couple little changes and pass it off as your own work, because it's basically stealing is what it is. And of course that's what Cartman basically did, and he didn't care, and it's what the boys kind of cared about, not necessarily to the same extent. Again, theirs was a little bit more of a focus on on illegal downloading rather than copyright infringement, but, you know, they're not exactly synonyms, but they're not antonyms, but they're still in the same kind of general area of immorality, I guess you could say. And then there was that little funny bit where the boys were gonna strike to, you know, prevent illegal downloading, and a whole bunch of other artists joined them. And what was it, Britney Spears, who was like, we're just doing this for money. And it's like, well, yeah, there are probably lots of musicians and artists out there that do it for money. Like, it's probably one of those scenarios where maybe initially they didn't, but eventually they did, or maybe they just kind of did it from the start. Like, who knows? But I guarantee you a lot of them probably did it just for the money, and I can't really blame them. Like, if you have a talent like that, and if you have people that are willing to listen or read some of your works and whatnot, why wouldn't you capitalize on that? Why wouldn't you? I mean, I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. It's certainly something that may not paint some people and artists and whatnot in a better picture, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Just saying. Again, it still is kind of a slight bit amusing that, you know, there's a bit of copyright infringement technically going on with this, because I'm basically just reacting to and reviewing something that's been established and created by somebody else who just made a parody of another real-life event that actually kind of happened or was a generalized thing of what happened. But it's not like I'm making money on this or anything. Well, technically I'm making money on the reviews, just not the actual reactions themselves, because YouTube wants to crack down on stuff like that. I can't blame them, but it can get annoying from time to time. So yeah, other than that, I really don't have too much more to say about the episode. I may have gone on a slight bit of a rant, but nowadays, when do I not? I'm trying to do that less and less, but at the same time, it's sometimes just hard not to do, especially when even if you rehearse something, you just know you're gonna fumble with your words over and over again and not remember the correct phrases or the words or the right concepts that you're trying to go for. This is why I handwrite all of my novels. This is why I don't type them, because my brain doesn't work fast enough for this kind of stuff. But anyways, before I go off on that tangent, I'm going to go ahead and end this little review here. I hope you found my review and my reaction as well interesting, or maybe not. Who knows? I figured I found it to be a little bit of an entertaining episode with some little funny bits strewn in here and there. So thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed these videos, and as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. Check you laters. Whoops. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 10, Grey Dawn. So if you're looking for the reaction, that's actually going to be down in the description below, as per usual. But if you're looking for the review, then you're here. So, as usual, let's just start with a quick recap of the episode. Like, quick. So all kinds of elderly people across Colorado are basically killing people while driving their cars, and so there's basically a decision to take all the elderly individuals' licenses away in the entire state, or entire country, whatever, entire state in this case. And so they decide to call on the AARP, which is like American Association of Retired Persons? That sounds about right. But the AARP is summoned, and all kinds of elderly people just start parachuting down into South Park to try and take over the town, and of course the leader of AARP is like, oh, we could probably take over the country too, but the boys, being the only ones who aren't captured by them, because mostly it's the adults that have been captured, decide to lock up the Country Kitchen Buffet, which is apparently where all the elderly people go to hang out, and without their food source, the elderly people kind of, you know, collapse everywhere. So the AARP, like, kind of backs off and stuff, and, you know, Randy initially reprimands his father, who kind of initially started all this, but Randy is kind of berating his father for kind of starting all this, and Stan's like, no, you're basically treating him like a kid, so stop doing that, and also, Grandpa, just stop freaking driving around, because you're gonna kill people. And then in the end, it kind of gets resolved, more or less. So real quick, first up, I'm going to get this immediately out of the way and say that the title of the episode, Grey Dawn, is actually a reference to a movie from the 80s, if I'm recalling correctly, called Red Dawn, which is literally just about all that I know. Like, from what I understand, a few of the concepts and plot lines are vaguely similar to what happens in the movie, but honestly, that is literally all I know about it. If it's any TV, movie, or music from before the 90s, don't consider me to know about it, or even like it very much, if I do know about it, but that's the only thing that I'm going to get out of the way real quick. The interesting thing that I did find out about this episode, though, was the fact that a lot of the general premise of it was actually based off an incident where I think it was in Santa Monica, and the only reason I remember that is because I've actually been to Santa Monica, but it was an old person who it was like an 80-something-year-old who drove through a Santa Monica farmer's market and ended up killing, like, 10 or 12 people, something like that. And granted, it's nothing to be funny about, obviously. It's quite a tragedy, very obviously. But it was interesting that was kind of what inspired a good deal of the plot lines, except for, the AARP parachuting in. That was mostly Red Dawn influence. But it was interesting how the general premise of the episode came from that event that occurred. I also listened in on Matt and Trey's commentary for a little bit for that particular episode, and they were talking about how at the time there were a whole bunch of news stories that were coming out a lot more frequently about old people driving into things or people or something of the sort. And how by that point either it was an event or a general kind of event that was happening more frequently, or the media was just, happening to catch wind of more of those kinds of stories. I'm willing to bet it's a little bit of the latter because this is the media that we're talking about, but it could still be a combination of both factors. So it's understandable that sort of idea became the premise for this particular episode. I can understand why. And then, of course, the creators made this episode knowing full well that, what happened in Santa Monica was obviously a terrible accident, but they also said something else as well, which is something I actually touched up on in my reaction, and that's how, yes, while elderly people do seem to have some problems when they're behind the wheel, especially, in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, that doesn't necessarily mean that elderly people, as a result, just need to automatically lose their licenses. I mentioned definitely once in my reaction, and maybe a few more times sprinkled in afterwards, that just because elderly people are elderly people does not automatically mean that they get to lose their licenses, simply because there were a few other elderly drivers who just happen to be really bad drivers and are plowing through buildings and signs and people and whatnot. But the biggest problem, honestly, is the retesting procedures for any driver's program, at least in terms of the States. I'm sure it may be similar in other countries as well, but at least what I know about the States is unfortunately not a lot. But there are a few retesting criteria that you need to meet if you have to be retested, but one of those criteria isn't necessarily age. So once you reach a certain age, you don't have to retest automatically, like, no matter what age you are, age is not an extenuating factor that's considered when you need to be considered for retesting for any kind of driving skills. The point is that there are reasons that people may need to retest, but age is not considered a factor, which in my mind is not exactly the best idea, because, especially as we get older, our brains don't function quite as fast. We start to lose a bunch of our senses, eyesight being one of them, and, there are plenty of people that already don't have enough great eyesight as is. I am one of those individuals. I wear contacts, and I'm pretty sure my vision is going to be getting worse. And then, of course, you have, medical conditions, like, I can't think of any of Alzheimer's is the first and only one that I can think of off the top of my head, but there are certain other kinds of medical conditions that could impair your driving ability as well, conditions that will often start popping up when you're older. So it's kind of interesting how there really is no mandatory requirements to be taking tests at an older age, when frankly it should be required for a number of reasons. The number of reasons which I've already listed off. Granted, there haven't necessarily been a lot of issues that have been happening in the United States where, elderly people are having problems with driving. It could be that, the media isn't reporting that, which would be a slight bit surprising, or they're just not happening as frequently because reasons. But even so, I at least personally feel like there should be some kind of age stopgate, I guess you could say, where people need to be retaking tests, and maybe every 5 or 10 years or something like that, they need to continue taking it again just to make sure, unless there are other circumstances that pop up or they're in an accident or something like that. Like, say, start at 65 technically, when people are technically considered senior citizens. It is 65, or is it 60? Does it depend on state? Or is it one or the other? I honestly can't remember. And here's the thing, not all elderly people are bad drivers. Again, I mentioned it in my reaction. My own grandparents are in their mid 60s to early 70s. Those are the ages of my grandparents, and yet I'm 24. My grandparents are fairly young, if it wasn't obvious. A good portion of them are still fairly good drivers, and they don't necessarily have any problems that are inhibiting their ability to drive. So there are obviously some people who are of the older variety, I guess you could say, in the nicest way possible. There are still some of those people who are good drivers and who don't really have any impairments that would necessarily affect their driving. But that doesn't mean it's the same for every senior citizen out there. But again, personally, I think the stop gates are going to be needed. Like 65 and maybe every 5 or 10 years, you just kind of have to do a retest, because, again, there are hardly any retesting circumstances that need to arise. And again, age is one of them, which I find to be a bit problematic, but I suppose there hasn't really been a lot happening. Maybe as soon as elderly people realize that, hey, I can't really drive as well as I used to, then they're just thinking to themselves, okay, maybe I should stop driving. Maybe I'll tell somebody. Maybe that's what's been happening, and that's why, there haven't been as many accidents lately, or maybe they're still going on and nobody's reporting it. I honestly don't know. But either way, I still think that little stop gate there and the requirement to retest due to age, I feel like that should be there. I think I've made that clear enough, so I'll just stop talking about that portion of it. But I hope I haven't disappointed any of you with not really talking too much about, the whole Grey Dawn, Red Dawn reference, but I'm sorry, I am uncultured swine. I apologize, but there's not a lot that I can do. It's partially being uncultured, mostly me not interested. So, I apologize for that, but I at least talked about what I wanted to talk about for this particular episode. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to end the review there. Turned out to be a little bit shorter than some of the other reviews, but that is okay, because I think I made my point multiple times. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this reaction and review, so thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 11. I'm sure I am sure that a lot of people were really excited for me to see this particular episode. But before I get too much into that, the link to the actual reaction is going to be down in the description below, but here's the review for all of you to see. Well, mostly here, but kind of see, sort of. Quick recap of the episode: it is Kyle's birthday, and he is allowed to invite 3 friends, being Kyle, Stan, and Butters. And of course Kyle's birthday is happening at freaking Casa Bonita in Lakewood, Colorado. I know everybody says Denver, but no, it's Lakewood, which is a suburb of Denver. There is a big difference. Whew, sorry, don't mind me, but yes, there is a big difference. But Kyle's birthday is happening, and Cartman is really mad that he can't go to Casa Bonita, so he tries to find all kinds of convoluted ways to trick Butters into hiding into like a sort of bomb shelter, convincing Butters that a meteorite is coming to destroy the Earth in order to keep Butters away so that Cartman can go to Casa Bonita. And it just gets all kinds of crazy convoluted. And once they do actually arrive at Casa Bonita, Butters is found, and Cartman is like, okay, time for us to go home. So Cartman quickly rushes through basically all of Casa Bonita, and he's just like, yes, it was totally worth it. And that's the episode. Like I said at the very beginning, a lot of people were looking forward to the reaction, and maybe the review as well, but I have a little bit of a confession to make, as it may be a little bit obvious in my commentary, because I think I paused like once or twice, or maybe even not at all. But I didn't have a lot of commentary. It didn't totally help that I was just a teeny bit tired, but just a teeny bit. But I just don't have too much of a review to add, except why I don't have much of a review to add. And yes, I know exactly what Casa Bonita is. I even made sure to research it myself. It is not a place where you go for the food. It is a place where you go for the locations inside the actual building, and the crazy, touristy little areas and the sopapillas and stuff like that. It's not a place you go for the food. It's a place you go for the experience. I had to make sure it was Casa Bonita and not something else, because I couldn't remember if it was another Colorado Mexican restaurant that was getting a bad rap for that kind of thing. I honestly couldn't remember, but I did my research and it was Casa Bonita, so I was right. And I think it was the creators who even asked Casa Bonita if they could use the restaurant and the locations inside the restaurant in the episode, and Casa Bonita was like, yeah, go ahead. And the creators were like, okay. you guys were cool before, but now you're super cool. So that's actually really fun to know. And the creators had actually, been there as children, so it's like they didn't want to riff on the episode, but they wanted to use it as a location, and Casa Bonita let them. And again, the creators had been there as children, so they had a pretty good idea of what it looked like from the inside. So what was in the episode is basically what it looks like on the inside, which I actually did not realize. So that was actually really cool to find out. It was also really interesting to learn that the sort of side plot, well, not entirely, more like one of, the two primary plots really, the plot with Cartman trying to convince Butters into like an underground bunker or whatever was actually a little bit of an idea that the show creators and the team in general, I think, had the idea for a really long time, and they just finally had a chance to use it with the whole Casa Bonita thing, and holy moly was it fantastic. I enjoyed every moment of it. It was so freaking funny. It was so humorous. I absolutely loved it. Like I've said before, the fact that Cartman is such a good manipulator and then Butters is just so naive, it's the perfect anti-combination. There's no, I can't think of a better way to say it. It really is the perfect anti-combination because, Cartman doesn't even need to really necessarily try hard to get Butters to agree with anything that he says, but he kind of did, so he would really sell the bit so that Butters would stay out of the way so that Cartman could go to Casa Bonita because he absolutely wants to. Every bit of their interaction, every bit of that little part of the story was just amusing in so many ways, as were the occasional interactions between Cartman and Kyle, with Cartman trying to get Kyle to, become the third man and be invited to Casa Bonita. It was... it was great. I saw the manipulation on Cartman's part coming from a mile away for both Kyle and Butters. Absolutely. At this point, most of the people who have watched my channel long enough know that I am from Colorado. Well, not from Colorado, but I live in Colorado. I have for a while now, for many years. But the problem is, Casa Bonita, unfortunately, does not mean the same thing to me as it does to many other Coloradans. And here's why. I mentioned before a little bit in my reaction, albeit with not the best explanation because I was trying to rush through to get back to the reaction bit, was that I was born in Minnesota. I lived there for the first 9 years of my life, and then I lived in New York for 2 years. So for the first 11 years, I was so far away, and I didn't really know anything about Colorado that there's no way I would have heard about Casa Bonita. And then, of course, by the time I moved to Colorado, I started middle school, and I don't think I really heard about Casa Bonita until late middle school or early middle school years. Late middle school and early high school years. Whoops. But yes, I really didn't hear about it until, at the latest, my early high school years. So for 13-ish, 14-ish years, I had no idea what Casa Bonita is. And by the time I did hear about it, it's like my family never really wanted to go there. They knew about it, but that was it. My family also didn't really go out for dinner very often. We were often at home doing our own thing. So that was another big part of it. But again, it was never a part of my childhood. It was never a part of anything in my life, really. It was just something that I occasionally heard about. So to this day, I've still never been there. It's never been, on my bucket list or anything. And then, of course, I certainly did not have any chances once I actually moved to Lincoln, Nebraska for 4-ish years to attend college. So it's not like I had any chances then either. And even nowadays, I would have a chance if it weren't for COVID, but even if it weren't for COVID, would I go there? I honestly have no idea. From what I understand, it means a lot to kids. Every kid in the Denver metro would probably have a birthday at Casa Bonita at some point, which is just crazy to think about. So it probably means a lot to the kids, but as adults, maybe it could have an impact as an adult. It might have the biggest impact as an adult if you were there as a kid, but as an adult who's never been there, I don't know if it would have the same impact or if it would even have impact at all. So I honestly don't know if I would ever go there, but as much as people were excited for me to see this particular episode, probably because given a lot of people do know that I live in Colorado, but it just doesn't mean a lot for me because I only know it by name. I've never actually been there myself. And I may have mentioned it in the reaction a little bit, but I've just never been there. And I never have. So would I go there at some point in the future? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. But that's probably where I'm going to have to end that part of the discussion, because there's a little bit of another discussion that I want to discuss. Something I mentioned, I think, right at the end of my reaction, just a little bit. It was an interesting concept that I kind of considered and was thinking about as the episode was progressing, how this was the first, as far as I can remember, the first real instance in the entire show that we'd seen a character, especially one of the main characters, have an actual birthday. Like, and you know, if it was one of the the adults or one of the older characters, and that would have been as big of a deal. But it was one of the kids who was having a birthday, who we knew was like 8 years old, or at least was assumed that every one of the kids in 4th grade was 8 years old. But it's an interesting thing to think about, because, like, again, Kyle was the one who had the birthday. He was the one who had the party. It was his birthday, obviously. But it still did strike me as interesting, because either the creators came up with the idea, or they explicitly wanted to show that one of the younger characters, one of the kids, did actually have a birthday, and there was some maybe semblance of time happening. So either they specifically wanted to show that it was Kyle that was having a birthday, whether it was for, specific plot elements, or they just, wanted to use it as a plot element because it kind of made sense. Either way, it was still really interesting to think about, and it's also interesting to think about because, again, like I said, Kyle's been the first, but what about the other characters? Does this mean that Kyle is actually potentially the oldest among the 4 boys, unless names Cartman, Kenny, and Stan get birthdays in the near future? Because if they don't, then it's hard to say where Kyle falls, but it's interesting to think about him being the oldest. Like, it's interesting to think about all of them being the oldest or the youngest or something like that. I never even, put any information in my head as to which combination it could potentially be. I never seriously thought about which one of them could potentially be the oldest or the youngest. I always, if it was ever a passing thought, it kind of went back and forth, but it was never really something that I thought about until this episode. So now I'm wondering if Kyle is the oldest, or maybe other birthdays just happen off screen, and maybe he's somewhere in the middle, maybe he's even the youngest, but I don't exactly know. But if we do happen to see any of the other 3 have birthdays in the near future, it's an interesting thing to think about. It really is. Because Kyle being the oldest, I mean, it's not a game changer what order they come in terms of, oldest to youngest. Nothing is a game changer, but it's still interesting to think about Kyle being the oldest. I always thought it would be interesting if Cartman were the oldest. However, I feel like he'd rub that in their faces a lot more, so I get the feeling he's probably the 2nd or the 3rd between them. I don't think he's the youngest necessarily, but I also don't think that he's the oldest of the 4. I would put him somewhere around the middle. Honestly, at the moment, my guess would be that Kyle is potentially the oldest, with maybe Cartman coming 2nd, and then Stan coming 3rd, and then Kenny being the youngest. That, just based on, I don't know if the creators necessarily even knew this far in who was the oldest or youngest among them, but I always thought it was interesting, just given this episode alone, and my knowledge of what the personalities have been like. And after some consideration a little bit as well. But I figured that would most likely be the order of, their birthdays. Again, from Kyle to Cartman to Stan to Kenny. I don't know for sure if I'm right. I don't even know if there is a defined order. There could be, but there also couldn't be. I honestly have no idea. But if there is a defined order, I feel like that could potentially be the most likely, for a variety of reasons. Obviously, I already said that I didn't think that Cartman was going to be the oldest or the youngest for a couple of reasons. Given his personality, I feel like if he were the youngest, he would get riffed on a lot more. But if he were the oldest, he'd probably, knowing his arrogant personality, he'd kind of, rub it in everybody else's faces. So it led me to believe that he was probably the 2nd or the 3rd among them. But then, of course, Kyle's the first scene that we've had having a birthday, so it's very possible that, he was the firstborn among the 4 of them. But, and, the reason that, Stan and Kenny might even fall where they are is because, for some reason, Stan doesn't give off youngest child vibes. Or, between the 4 of them, at least. But Kenny kind of does, and it's kind of hard to say exactly why. It's just, in this case, it's something I'm kind of going with my gut. Like, there are reasons logically that I put Kyle and Cartman where I do, but it's more of a gut feeling between Stan and Kenny. And again, I'm not really sure why. Not fully sure, but it's just taking all the information that I can about them as characters and what they've done in the past. Again, if there is a defined order for how all these four characters are to one another, and it's possible we may see, maybe even at least one more birthday in the near future, or we may not even see any, so that could just throw my theory right out the window. I honestly have no idea. But basically, at this point, Kyle would be 9, and the rest of them would probably be 8, because they've already been established as being 8-year-olds, right? They have. They've been established as 8-year-olds. But maybe it just happened that way, maybe the creators just needed an idea, or maybe they intentionally showed that it was Kyle who was the one having the party. Because again, they've been established as being 8 years old, but now that's not necessarily the case anymore. I get the feeling it is kind of intentional, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm just gonna have to watch more episodes and find out. Sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent. That does happen sometimes, but again, I was really thinking about this hardcore by the time that episode ended, with the whole birthdays and ages now. Because again, if it were an adult, if it were anybody like in their 30s or above, maybe even anyone in their 20s or above, I probably wouldn't have cared as much. But it's the fact that it's one of the 4 boys that had a birthday that just really, it caught my attention. It got my gears whirring. So, I don't know if I'm right. I suppose I'll just have to find out. I'll have to continue watching more episodes to solve the mystery. So, I'm going to go ahead before I continue on a tangent any further. I'm going to end it there. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this reaction and the review as well. It was interesting to talk about the characters for once, and, I'm sorry to disappoint anybody about Casa Bonita, but it is what it is. But anyways, as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 12, Episode 12, all about Mormons. So, as usual, the link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, but here's the review with a very quick recap. I'm hoping I can make it quick. There's a new family in town, and therefore a new kid in school named Gary, I want to say his name is. But he's like, super nice, and he's super good at school and sports and stuff, and the boys are like, no. So Stan's like, okay, well, I'm gonna beat him up. But he gets invited to Gary's house, and it turns out that Gary and his family are Mormons! And, they're like, super nice and super chill, and so, Stan eventually kind of brings the news back to his family. Randy tries to talk to them, initially in a very bad way, but then he is eventually going back to his family like, okay, let's everybody become Mormons. And then during the whole general process, there is a sort of animated story about, the Book of Mormon, or generalized animated story about the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith as he's trying to, create Mormonism, I guess you would say. But eventually Stan gets fed up and is basically like, so Mormons believe in all this nonsense that doesn't seem to be, factually supported, and he, gets all mad. But then Gary is eventually confronting him the next day, like, it doesn't need to be factually true for me to believe whatever I want to believe, and then he says some things that, the regular characters say instead of being all nice, and, Stan's family is back to normal, and everything is back to normal. Pretty much. When I initially watched the episode and watched how nice Gary was being, I was thinking in my head, okay, it's one of two things. He and his family are actually really super nice, or it's some kind of weird, conspiracy to conform everybody to Mormonism, or some secret plot or something like that. But the more I was, watching it, and the more I was thinking about it, I'm like, I think it's the former. I think they're just super nice. And then I recalled from, what was it, the South Park movie? No, it wasn't the South Park movie, but I think it was one of the earlier season episodes where it was basically revealed that the only people that are allowed into heaven are Mormons. And for one thing, I could not believe that I remembered that just right off the top of my head. But second, it made sense given the characters and the plot of this episode. Yeah. And then, of course, by the end of the episode, I'm just like, nope, they're basically just really nice, and yeah, they're just really nice. That's all there is to it. They're just super nice people, and they, kind of have their own way of living that works for them. It's just a lot nicer and a lot more, It was interesting to see that the animated story of the occasional bits they had, the animated story with Joseph Smith and how Mormonism was founded, was actually kind of based off of the actual Book of Mormon, with a few extra details sprinkled in there. And the creators actually grew up around a lot of Mormons when they were younger, so it makes sense that they would kind of know about this thing and that they might kind of, put it out there a little bit, especially in an animated show like this. And even they admitted they really couldn't riff on it in a very good way, but the best that they could do was basically kind of retelling the Book of Mormon, pretty generalized parts of it, in an animated form, just to kind of show off the ridiculousness of how the religion was founded. And they even said that some of the people that found this particular episode the funniest were their Mormon friends. Their Mormon friends were just laughing at this episode like, oh yeah, it really is great and absurd all at the same time, but it was also really interesting to think about. Religion is not normally something I talk about, at least not in everyday conversation, because I know that for, plenty of people out there, it can usually be a touchy subject. I don't even always mention that I myself am atheist, but I know I've mentioned it probably a couple times in the past, but I've also mentioned, I know for a fact that I mentioned in a previous review, probably a Season 6 review actually, where I was talking about how it doesn't necessarily matter what religion that people have, but in my book, it's at least about, what makes you happy, what works for you, for your family, and, having good morals and stuff like that. And clearly, for this little new Mormon family, whether they stay in South Park, who necessarily knows, but for this particular little Mormon family that's new to South Park, it doesn't really matter that there is no, proof or evidence to back up the origins of their story. In a way, every single religion is just a collection of stories that may not necessarily, that probably don't have a whole lot of factual evidence behind them. And yes, I am saying this, I am an atheist, I kind of base a bunch of my decisions based on logic and scientific fact and stuff like that. I've always been like that. It's not really how I grew up, it's what I grew into. It's something that I chose to grow into as well. My sister is the exact same way. Like, she uses science and logic, and I actually didn't even realize she was atheist until a few years ago, which is actually kind of funny. You think you know some people. But, there's some instances, even like with Christianity. Do I believe that there was an individual at that time named Jesus Christ? Yes, I actually do believe that he did exist. Do I necessarily believe all of the other stuff relating to, like, the origins of Christianity and, Jesus Christ's, ascension and whatnot? Do I necessarily believe that? Not really. There's not a whole lot of evidence to back it up. And, yes, please do not flood my comments or anything with that, but there is proof, here and there and stuff like that. I don't look much into religion. I don't necessarily base my beliefs on religion. I base them off of scientific fact, but the point that I'm trying to make is that, again, most religions are just collections of stories that may not have a lot of evidence to back them up, but that's okay. I know for a fact, I've said this in a previous review, especially when it pertained to religion specifically, where there are billions of people on this planet. There are over 7 billion people on this planet. You really expect them to believe the exact same thing, given the different geographical regions they're from, given their different genders and ages, and given the different histories with every single part of the world, different experiences we all have in our lives. You really think that we're all going to be believing in the same thing? This is not like freaking 1984. There's no Big Brother watching that's kind of sort of subtly forcing us to all just, do the same thing and believe in the same thing. No, it's nothing like that. We all have our different choices. We all have our different beliefs, and that's okay. Because, again, Gary summed it up perfectly at the end of the episode. It doesn't necessarily matter if there's proof or not. Because as long as, there's still those stories that still compel people to have their faith and beliefs, to be good neighbors to one another, to be respectful and responsible, and to be honest and trustworthy. As long as there are good morals that are the basis of these religions, what's the harm in it? There isn't any. There isn't any harm in it at all. Even after realizing that the animated Book of Mormon parody was actually kind of based off of what happened in the actual Book of Mormon, and seeing how absurd it is, but some people will believe it. Some people will realize it's absurd but still follow the teachings, and some people will follow it just hardcore. I mean, every single religion has that. There are the people that follow it so freaking hard that they believe every single word of what they're hearing related to that religion. But then you have the other individuals who follow it a little bit more loosely. If I'm recalling correctly, I believe, and I mentioned him previously in a reaction or review, Steve Hofstetter is a comedian. He's a Jewish comedian who follows Jewish traditions a little bit more loosely than some other people. And of course that there are multiple different sects of Judaism, which I'm not even going to get into that. There's just so much. But he doesn't necessarily hardcore follow Judaism. He kind of loosely follows it in his own way, but he still has his ideas, his morals, his beliefs. And again, as long as you have that basis, that ground to stand on firmly, there's not going to be a friggin' earthquake or anything like that. That was a terrible analogy. I need to come up with better analogies. That was bad. That was really bad. Honestly, the best sort of analogy that I can come up with is, not really an analogy, but something that my parents used to tell me they used to tell me a lot when I was younger. If it's not broke, don't change it. Like, if you have a solid basis of morals and ideas, there really isn't any need to change it. There really isn't. And I'm still the same way. Yes, I may be atheist, but I still have my morals, I still have my integrity, I still have my honesty and my respect for so many different individuals of so many different backgrounds, whether it's, different religions, different race, different gender, different sexuality, like whatever the case. But I still have my moralities, and everybody can have, the same morals and still believe in different, religions, different origins, different faiths necessarily, but we're human. We're not going to believe the same thing, but, if we've got kind of the same general ideas of what to believe in terms of, like I said, morals, but it really, I know I keep saying it over and over again, but it really is the best word to use, because the word alone just encapsulates so much, but as long as you have that, there really isn't any need to, change it. There's no reason to have a problem with it. And on a little bit of a side note, I think I've noticed a couple times already that Stan's been put in sort of a weird sort of position, like, him having to be the one to beat up the new kid for being too nice or something, and him being like, okay, well, I'm gonna be the one who's gonna put the weed in this bag because nobody else wants to touch it or something like that. It's always weird that Stan ends up being puts himself into these kinds of positions. It's kind of a 50-50. He kind of goes back and forth between the other characters putting him into those little positions, or him just putting himself into that position. He does it a lot more often than a lot of the other characters. Isn't that interesting? Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Who knows? Could be anything. I hope I don't say the word moral too much in the near future, because I probably said that way too many times in this episode. If somebody counts the number of times I said it, I'm probably gonna be amazed by your efforts for doing so, and horrified at the same time, because I'm pretty sure I said it at least a couple dozen times. I apologize for that. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm going to end it there. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this reaction and this review. I'm sorry if I talked about religion again, and pretty much said kind of the same things with a slight bit of a twist on them. But as usual, until the next video, guys, I'll check you later. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 13, Butt Out. So as usual, the link to the actual reaction is going to be down in the description below, but here's the review portion with a very quick recap. An anti-smoking group comes to South Park and does a weird presentation that's kind of unbearable to the boys, and so as a result they start smoking and subsequently set the school on fire. And, initially the kids are to blame, but then it's like, oh no, we're going to blame the tobacco companies instead, so the kids shift the blame. And Rob Reiner, who is an advocate for, anti-smoking stuff decides to come to South Park to give a presentation. Rob Reiner and his gang, who are ultimately kind of a bit of skeevy individuals and kind of uptight skeevy individuals, are basically using the boys to get at the tobacco companies by falsifying information. And initially Cartman kind of goes along with it and the other three boys kind of back out, but then Cartman eventually backs out too because, otherwise Rob Reiner and his skeevy gang are gonna kill him. Eventually everything blows out of proportion and Rob Reiner and the tobacco company, with, the town backing up Rob Reiner initially, kind of go head to head, and then the boys are like, okay, no, this is our fault, we take responsibility for this. Fuck you, Rob Reiner, and tobacco companies are okay, it's a choice, we learned a lesson, no we really didn't, and that's the episode. There were a couple of main points that were kind of illustrated throughout the entirety of this episode, mainly two of them. One, which I kind of noticed, towards the middle of the episode, where the episodes, like the structure of all the episodes seems very formulaic in nature, where it just kind of happens the same way, where, the boys get in trouble, and so they might tend to shift blame, which basically turns the townsfolk against another party or group of some sort, and then it just snowballs into crazy chaos until the boys are like, okay, we take responsibility and we learned a lesson, I guess. So that was one of the main points. The other main point obviously related to smoking, but kind of in a number of ways, in a manner of speaking. Some point that was both in line with the first and the second points with the whole, smoking issue as well as the formulaic nature. The South Park adults are freaking ignorant as heck. I like to call it South Park adult logic, where the adults, they don't fully understand the situation and they sort of immediately jump to conclusions, and once they realize that, oh no, it's not their boys' fault, it's the tobacco company's fault, they're like, okay, well, we're gonna call Rob Reiner and we're going to sort of attack the tobacco companies, because we're South Park adults. we jump to conclusions. We don't use logic, except for Chef, who is sadly absent. Unless he had a brief cameo where he wasn't actually speaking or anything. I wasn't particularly looking, but unfortunately he was not present from what I saw. And then, of course, and related to the whole smoking issue, there were a number of points used in regards to that. One of them being the creators said themselves in, I think their commentary was, where there were some smoking bans in California, so it's like, well, we can't necessarily not talk about that. And then Rob Reiner, who I honestly had no idea who that was an advocate for anti-smoking, and so they're like, okay, well, we got some ideas, so let's just kind of put the two together, and in of course, the South Park way, it worked. But now I'm going to start going in a little bit of an order based on what I saw throughout the entire episode. So first off, when that group, they were called Butt Out, so basically the title of the episode, decided to come and, do anti-smoking stuff, and the presentation, musical presentation that they kind of put up was just over the top and a little bit cheesy. Like I said in my reaction, I was half entertained and half I cannot bear this. This is what in the world. People that are my age or a little bit older, you remember this stuff from elementary school and middle school. You remember these presentations, these people or groups that were coming to your school to do quick anti-smoking, bits, whether it was, little comedic bits. Okay, there were actually a couple of them I had attended that were actually a little bit amusing, but the rest of them were kind of just meh. Because that's exactly how they were, honestly, the episode betrayed that perfectly, which is actually something I can identify with and recognize, because I remember those kinds of presentations. Definitely 4th and 5th grade I saw one, I may have seen one in 3rd grade, and I think I saw a couple in middle school as well. I may have seen one in high school that was against smoking and drugs and stuff like that, but point is, I've seen a bunch of them. I know exactly what these kinds of presentations are like, and don't get me wrong, the people have good intentions usually, but sometimes they try a little too hard. They try to be a little bit too, cheesy and upbeat for people like us, for, kids like us. We probably find more entertainment and laughing at it rather than actually taking in that information and retaining it. In regards to, oh, smoking is bad for you, it'll give you, lung cancer and stuff like that. And then it kind of brings me to the next point, where we see Rob Reiner receive information from the parents of South Park. He is heavy advocating for anti-smoking restrictions and procedures and whatnot, which, is apparently something he actually did, which I found out, which I didn't realize, but it was actually something that he did. But then, like, you know, he's talking about, you know, all these tobacco companies with their fancy chairs and stuff, and their nice buildings and whatnot. They make all the money and stuff like that, where he's in the exact same situation, just on the opposite side of the fence. He's in a big chair in a fancy building, and he's got, you know, vacation houses and other friggin' countries, and it's an amusing little detail that I know that I don't always, but I noticed right off the bat how he was talking about that when he was basically in the same position, just again on the other side of the fence. And then of course there's the obvious thing that I noticed and made note of in my reaction as well, where he's talking about all this, and yet he's super unhealthy with his eating habits. It was just so freaking obvious. Oh yeah, sure, smoking's not exactly good for you, but no, nom, 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 I'm just gonna eat whatever the frick I want, because, you know, that's certainly not unhealthy. I noticed that right away, and I even like paused and talked a little bit about it, because it was just that freaking obvious. Ouch, I just hit my hand. Because yes, there are plenty of things that are bad for you. Smoking can be bad for you, but obviously unhealthy eating is also bad for you, just in very different ways. That was supposed to be the point. That was obviously satirized. Satirized? I'm pretty sure that's the right word. Then there's the scene where Rob Reiner and the boys are in the bar, and Rob catches a middle-class worker smoking, and Rob's just like, "Eh, what the hell are you doing? You can't smoke in here." And yeah, there's the funny thing about, oh well, smoking in bars is, you know, not disallowed in Colorado, and I'm just like, what's wrong with this hillbilly state or something like that? I mean, I don't blame him for saying. I mean, Colorado is something else. I mean, there aren't a lot of pot restrictions. we were one of the few states who didn't really, well, we didn't ban it for one thing. Granted, I only briefly mentioned it too, but I was like, yeah, you can't understand the plight of a middle-class worker, Rob Reiner. Because, you know, obviously that's kind of the point. Rob Reiner and his skeevy associates, they're like skeevy elitists, and they think that, you know, they deserve they deserve everything, and they know everything without realizing that that's what they think, kind of mindset. But then it sort of alienates them from, like, you know, middle class or even, you know, low class workers, plenty of whom smoke as a result of their jobs. I mean, you know, the older worker, middle class worker, even mentioned, you know, he was like doing 13-hour shift or something like that, so he needs to smoke to relax, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later. Of course, there was the commercial that Cartman was a part of where information was falsified as to, oh, Cartman has lung cancer now because of secondhand smoking. He's gonna die before anybody even sees the commercial kind of nonsense. The boys kind of knew initially, and Cartman kind of, well, he already kind of knew, but he just didn't want to die, so that's why he got away from them. But the point was that, you know, there are some people, even from both sides of the spectrum, I would imagine, from, you know, like tobacco companies and from anti-smoke programs, that might try and falsify a little bit of data. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that in cases like those, there are guilty parties, and they can come from either side, is the thing. I mean, not everybody does it. There are certainly some people that don't, but there are some people who will falsify information and data in order to get people to believe what they believe, to get people on their side. I mean, Rob Reiner even said something similar himself in the episode. And then at the very end of the episode, there was the lesson that they learned, well, that Stan thought that they learned, and Kyle's just like, we didn't learn a freaking thing. Not one thing. Because at this point, the boys should know. It was so freaking meta. The boys just knew that at that point, that everything that had happened, well, like a lot of the things that had happened up to that point, even in the movie, now that I think about it, where the boys get into trouble or they do something bad, and so they try and shift the blame somewhere else, or onto someone else, or to some group or company, or heck, even the government, who freaking knows. And then, like, it just incites this crazy chaos every single time. And then the boys eventually would fess up at the very end and be like, you know, we learned something today, and, you know, I think I think Kyle initially started saying, "Yeah, we learned something today." See, I told you we were gonna do it. We learned something today, but then he eventually kind of backtracked and saying, "No, we didn't learn a freaking thing." Because really, if you think about it, they didn't. This has happened so many freaking times. So many times. I initially said in my reaction that I was a little surprised that Stan was the one who didn't first pipe up, and I was, I was a slight bit surprised that it was Kyle who was the first one to stand up, but then after I was watching a lot more into the episode, I'm like, actually, it kind of makes sense now that Kyle was the one to first pipe up about, oh, maybe we shouldn't trust, Rob Reiner and his skeevy associates. At this point, I'm starting to come up with my own, ideas and analyses for some of the characters, some of which I think I've gotten right, but some of which I've talked a little bit about, but not much, but a couple of which that I haven't really talked about that I might have gotten wrong. Because I was starting to assess the characters and kind of give each of them their own, character category, because I sometimes do that with my own characters for my own stories. It was already pretty obvious that, Cartman was the manipulator. He was absolutely in the manipulator class. And again, my classifications might be a little bit different, but at least with some characters in a bunch of stories, not really other people's stories, but usually my own, I try and assign sort of roles to every single character based on, their personalities, what they tend to do, and just, obviously what kind of role they have within the group necessarily. And I mean, you have the four boys, obviously. I haven't really assigned a definitive name to Kenny's character yet, but I've got a couple of ideas rolling around, but I haven't settled on anything just yet. But Cartman was obviously the manipulator, for obvious reasons. And for the longest time, I honestly saw Stan as the moral compass. He was kind of the moral compass, but I also saw him as the most logical of the four. He was the one who tended to use logic the most, and I saw Kyle being the most emotional one. I hadn't really said a word to it, but definitely towards the emotional area, because it's something I've noticed where he tends to let his emotions dictate his moves a lot more than the other boys tend to. So what I mean by that is, obviously, you have Kyle and Stan especially, and kind of Kenny, and not really Cartman. I'm just throwing him out of the equation just for this quick thing. You have Kyle and Stan and kind of Kenny, who will get emotional sometimes. I mean, mostly it's going to be Kyle and Stan who will get emotional about certain issues, but usually, more often than not, it's Kyle who's the one who lets his emotions about certain types of issues dictate his actions, some of which can be extreme. Like, I mentioned it with the Pokemon episode, where he fell behind on a fad, as well as the South Park is Gay episode, where he was introduced into a fad, but then was like, no, I'm going to just be myself, and he went to extremes in both cases as sort of a result of his emotional state, in a way. But sort of looking at their personalities now, especially with this particular episode, realizing that, Kyle was the first one to say something about not trusting Rob Reiner and his associates. I initially thought it might have been Stan, and was surprised it was Kyle, but then I'm like, wait, it makes sense that it's Kyle. Because I was even talking about how, Kyle and Cartman will butt heads fairly often. It's happened a number of times, and that's in large part because they're kind of on opposite sides of the personality spectrum. Granted, there are all different kinds of personalities, but Cartman is sort of emotionless, he's kind of cold and definitely manipulative, whereas Kyle is, well, sometimes, honest and a lot more emotional, but he's a lot more of a moral compass. And there's a reason I use that term specifically, because again, I mentioned that I thought that Stan for the longest time was definitely logical, but kind of the moral compass of the group, but I think I may have been wrong, because I don't think any of them are the moral compass necessarily, because they each have their moments, and they each have their flaws as well. I mean, they're kids, and they're characters, so they have to have their flaws, obviously. But now I'm thinking that maybe maybe it was Kyle who has the most morality, which is why he was the first one to speak up and why he butted heads with Cartman so much, because the situation was ripe for the picking for Cartman, given his personality, but it completely went against what Kyle knows based on his past actions, based on how he was raised, based on just his general personality and what he's done in the past, in past episodes even. Sorry, I went on a little bit slight of a tangent, but I felt like it was kind of important to mention, because again, I talked a little bit about it during my reaction. I thought it would go one way, but it went the other way, and I'm like, it kind of made me rethink some of the characters in just a slight way. But then of course there's one more quick thing that I want to talk about too, and that's, well, kind of the idea of smoking in general and how it's all about choice. I think I mentioned it in a review in the past, but there are all different kinds of themes that I love thinking about or discussing, and the nature of choice is definitely one of those things that I find fascinating, that I love to talk about. Because again, I'm pretty sure I've said it, it's what makes humans human. But that's all I'm going to say about that, because I know I've talked about that in the past. I don't remember the episode that I talked about that. But the fact of the matter is, something like smoking can be seen a little bit as a lifestyle, but mostly it can be seen as a choice. There are plenty of low and middle class workers who will, especially, if they worked in factory type settings, or they work in long hour jobs or stressful jobs where they need something to relax, and for a lot of people smoking does just that. Everybody has their coping mechanism, and smoking is sometimes seen as one of them. And alcoholism is seen as that, and unhealthy eating is also seen as that. Like, it's not necessarily stuff that's unhealthy for you, but in the short term it helps plenty of people when they just need to relax and just get away from it and just not even think about, their day-to-day lives, stressful jobs, stressful situations, crazy families. There are a number of reasons that people turn to it, but it's all a choice. And sometimes it's kind of hard whether to make that choice or whether to completely avoid it. It's different for everybody. It obviously kind of depends on the personality of somebody. It's just a choice. But as long as it's done in moderation, and as long as, it kind of helps you a little bit, and as long as, I suppose, you're not putting your life in any danger, or any serious danger. Granted, a lot of smoking can cause some serious health concerns, especially in regard to the respiratory system. But come on, even I know that the whole secondhand smoke thing is just overblown by so many people. Like, you really think you're gonna get a little smoke in your face, and you're all of a sudden gonna get mesothelioma or some nonsense like that. No, like, that's not really how it works. You usually get respiratory damage if, you've been smoking excessively for extended periods of time. Like, you'd probably need to be smoking like at least a couple cigarettes a day for like a few years even, to get even a little bit of damage. Which I'm not advocating for smoking. Like, it's obviously your choice. I personally wouldn't do it myself. And granted, even when I'm walking on the sidewalk and I see smoke about to come into my face, I hold my breath for a little bit. But that's more of me just not liking the smell or the taste of it in my mouth. Like, I don't like it personally. I don't like it especially when people do it in some public places, but it's a choice. It's a choice on their part. Like, what can you do? I mean, at least people could try and be respectful of other people who don't smoke. Because, sorry, I just hate the smell and the taste of it. Granted, I've tried an e-cigarette. It was like once. It was years ago. It's not the same thing as a cigarette, but ugh, that taste in my mouth that it left. Ugh, I hated that. So obviously, if you're watching this and you are a smoker, it's your choice, and I'm not advocating for smoking. I'm not advocating against it. It just is. It really just is. I personally won't. If you want to, and you feel that there's a reason to, then that's fine. Just as long as, you're being respectful of others, and as long as you're, doing it in moderation to be respectful of other people. I could have talked about, some other things like, drugs and alcohol, but I'm sure that there will be future episodes for topics like that because at the moment I'm just focused on smoking. So let's just keep it that way. Other than the brief tangent about talking about the characters, which I thought was important to talk about, like I really do think it was important to talk about the characters because especially now that I'm really starting to analyze some of the characters and now that I'm thinking about doing a review simply on analyzing a bunch of the characters, maybe sometime soon. But I don't think it was too much of a tangent, because it did affect how I viewed the episode for a little bit. But other than that, I actually think I didn't do too bad. I talked about a lot of other little points, but I wanted to. And I made sure not to go on too much of a tangent of stuff I know I've talked about before. I still can't remember what episode it was where I was talking about how I love the idea and concept of the nature of choice. I don't remember what other episode I was talking about that. And I wish I could. Anyways, that is all that I've got for this particular video, so thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the review, and I hope you enjoyed the reaction as well. And as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters. What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for South Park Season 7, Episode 14, Raisins. Before I get too much into anything, you guys know the drill. The link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below. This is actually the review, but again, I'm pretty sure a bunch of you probably know that by now, which means that the first thing to start off with is a recap of the episode. Wendy has broken up with Stan, and she is now with Token, but that's not found out until a little bit later. So the boys, namely kind of Kyle, try and cheer him up by bringing him to a place called Raisins, where the waitresses are basically girls their own age with, interesting attire. But Stan doesn't get interested. But Butters does, in one of the waitresses named Lexus. Kyle is still kind of berating Stan for, moping around and is like, oh, well, if you're going to continue moping around, go hang out with the goth kids. So Stan does just that. He starts hanging out with them, talking like them, dressing like them. And Butters is still getting all, nice with the girl at Raisins, thinking that they're boyfriend and girlfriend, even though he just can't seem to read her body language and all and realize she doesn't actually have an interest in him. She's just kind of doing her job. Butters eventually finds out about what his girlfriend Lexus really is, and he's super sad and depressed about it. Stan and the goth kids find him, and Butters basically kind of has a sort of revelation that shakes Stan out of his sort of goth stage. And then the next day Stan is like, okay, well it still hurts, but I'm kind of out of that phase, so I want to play ball with you guys. And also, Wendy, you're a bitch, and a frick you, Token. When I initially watched the episode with the Raisins girls, I'm like, it's like, what did I say? Something like, it's like a strip club, but for kids, and the girls are like hoes or prostitutes or something, but not the raunchy kind, the sort of, tame kind or something like that. It was a terrible analogy, but it was the best I could come up with. Well, pardon my uncultured brain because I was dead wrong. Or at least, kind of wrong, I think? This was actually a reference I did not understand in the slightest. I had no idea. So Raisins was apparently, the general idea for the episode that the creators wanted was they had the idea of Raisins for a while. They just hadn't been able to introduce it. But Raisins is basically a parody of a restaurant called Hooters. Or like a chain of restaurants called Hooters. I've heard about it on rare occasion, but that's literally about it. I did not know anything about Hooters, and as soon as I saw that Raisins was a parody of Hooters, I'm like, why would it be a parody of Hooters? Well, I actually had to dig a little deeper to find out why. Hooters girls. That's apparently a thing. Seriously, I didn't know anything about this. I'd only rarely heard of Hooters, and I literally did not know anything about them. I didn't know what their business style was. I didn't know what kind of food they served. I didn't even know what the waitresses were like, but I guess I apparently found that out. As soon as I found it, I'm like, no freaking way this place exists, and sure enough it did. I didn't know anything. I've never been to a Hooters. I've mentioned it in a couple of episodes in the past. My family and I never went, not never. We didn't go out very much for dinner. Usually it was mom and sometimes dad helped me making, good, wholesome meals at home. There's no way my parents would have ever taken my sister and I to one of these, so I guess that kind of makes sense why I've never heard of this. I've never known about what Hooters is or what the waitresses are like. I've never known. I'm sorry that I'm uncultured. I just don't know shit. The creators came up with Raisins, like, you know, a while ago. I don't know if it was like a season ago or a few years beforehand or something like that. But they created with the idea, but they just didn't know how to integrate it into the story. So then somebody spouted out the idea, well, what if, well, like, you know, why would, you know, you take your friend to Hooters, you know, to console a friend who just got broken up with somebody. So that's where the idea was sprinkled in that Wendy was gonna break up with Stan and he was gonna need some help from friends who didn't really give him much help by bringing in the Hooters at all. And then one of the creators, like, somebody threw around the whole goth joke, but then it kind of got, you know, tossed into the episode and something like that. And one of the creators was like, yeah, I remember I used to go to a Perkins, which I know what Perkins is. I used to live in Minnesota. There's Perkins all over the place in Minnesota, trust me. It was the breakfast place where I used to live. So I know exactly what Perkins is. But one of the creators used to see a bunch of goth kids like hang around in a Perkins for, you know, hours just sipping on coffee, so, which is clearly reflected in like, you know, the scene where Stan and the goth kids are basically just sipping on coffee, like, just nonstop, and that's literally all they're doing. And then what was it? It was somebody mentioning how, you know, nonconformists drink coffee, conformists don't drink coffee, and I'm like, I think I started saying, like, you know, I'm not a conformist, but I drink coffee, and I think I intended it to make a semblance of sense, but then I'm like, no, but that means I am a nonconformist because I do drink coffee, but not that kind of nonconformist, so I just confused the heck out of myself. Which, you know, happens on occasion with some of these episodes. And then there has to be that little joke with Jimmy. You know the one I'm talking about. I'm not gonna repeat it, but the one where Jimmy is trying to give Wendy a message from Stan, but it comes out wrong, and that was one of the funniest moments in the entire episode. That was gold. That was so good. But I definitely did have a favorite moment of this particular episode. The MVP of this episode goes to freaking Butters. Butters of all characters. I've mentioned it before, he's so innocent and so naive. So often. And so many of the characters, especially Cartman, take advantage of him for that, and I mean, I can understand why. He's like the personification of naive. He's also apparently like Cartman, where he can't take a hint and he can't read expressions and body language and whatnot. He couldn't tell that Lexus wasn't actually interested in him, but I mean, those tactics are kind of supposed to work. These girls really are HOES in training. They really are. I mean, if you think about it, they're basically using their appearances and their attire and their feminine charm in order to get more tips and what. Like, come on. Come on, the parallels are just so freaking obvious. It's like they want to work at a strip club eventually. So that's why I said when, you know, I initially called them, like, you know, it's like a strip club for kids, you know, that sort of analogy. That's why I said I wasn't totally wrong, but I wasn't totally right either. But Stan and Butters get dumped by girls, and, you know, both fall into a sort of depression, I guess you could say, in a manner of speaking. And, you know, Stan is eager to just, you know, kind of take the easy way out. Like, I guess not really the easy way out, but in a way, the way that I see it is kind of the easy way out, by just kind of falling deeper into despair and just giving in to the darkness. Whereas Butters takes the complete opposite approach, where he's like, well, shit is gonna happen. Bad stuff is gonna happen to us no matter what, so you just gotta keep living life and looking forward to the good. There's, like I've always mentioned multiple times, there's no good without the bad and no bad without the good. I've mentioned that multiple times in my own day-to-day life because it's absolutely true. There are times where you have to deal with shit, but there are other times where you get rewarded for what happens. Like, and sometimes some of the good and the bad that happens may be connected, sometimes it may not be. But both are gonna happen. You're not gonna have a perfect life, but you're also not gonna have the absolute worst life. Like, it's just that one moment of kindness, or it's that one moment of falling, of just smacking rock bottom in the face. There's always that one time. Nobody has it perfectly in the good or the bad. Like, we get both. I wouldn't say we get a healthy dose of both, because more often than not, it's not in our control. Some of us may get a little bit of both. Some of us may get more good than bad. Some may get more bad than good. But we're gonna get both regardless. Once again, Butters is still the MVP, because even though he got dumped, and in just a really shitty way in his mind at least, he still thought that life was worth living, and that there was still going to be good, and he could still find things to look forward to, and yes, it's going to hurt for a while, but, you know, things will get better. I mean, it's kind of a similar concept when you have, you know, a death of a friend or death in the family. Like, it hurts. It really hurts, especially initially, and it never goes away, but it does get easier. And, you know, it doesn't just, you know, stay rock bottom, unless you make it stay that way. If something bad happens, it's your choice how to deal with it. Stan clearly initially did not deal with it in the best way. He just stayed in the darkness and just kept moping around, and even resorted to, you know, to joining the goth kids. And the only reason that I say that that's bad is because he changed his entire individuality, because he couldn't find, he didn't see an easier way out. He couldn't find a good way out, in a manner of speaking. But at least he kind of learned his lesson in the end. And normally, these characters learn lessons in the end, and it was awesome that it was Butters who got to share that with us. Normally it's one of the main characters, and occasionally the adults, or, you know, some other, you know, prominent figures, like maybe Santa or Jesus or something like that. But the fact that the lesson of the episode came from Butters of all characters, like, heck yes. Heck yes. Man, can the creators of South Park really grow some of these characters if they really put their minds to it. But it's also not surprising that Butters would have this kind of insight. Like, this is how he goes about life. Like, I can't remember if I mentioned it earlier in the review, or if I mentioned it in the reaction, but he looks at everything so optimistically. So, of course, he's the one to, you know, say a message like this. Of course it's him. It's the only thing that makes sense. And, you know, it just had to happen the way it did. It's not like one of his friends could have told him this. He saw Butters in the same situation, and then Butters being all, you know, wise and insightful, and Stan is like, yeah, I got it. So yeah, MVP goes to Butters, and I'm sorry that I didn't understand the original parody of this episode. I'm not sure if it's a good or a bad thing that I know that about Hooters now. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, honestly. Normally it's a good thing that it's like, okay, well, I finally understand, you know, this cultural or political reference or something of the sort, but in this case I'm just thinking, I know it now, but I don't know if I want to, but I guess I do, so there's really nothing I can do. I guess there's some references that I'm just not gonna like. But there are some references I am gonna like. See what I did there? Come on. But anyways, that is going to be it for this review and this reaction. I hope you enjoyed both, by the way. And from what I understand, it was actually an episode that some people were hoping to see a good reaction from me. I hope I provided that. I really do. I'm sorry that I didn't understand the reference. Like, I'm sorry. I'm uncultured. What can I say? I can't wait. I honestly can't wait until later seasons where there start to pop up more references that I actually do know of and do understand, because a bunch of these are ones I have to research. That's part of why I do these reviews, but I'm done. I'm cut. I'm out. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed these videos, and as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters! What up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to the review for the final episode of Season 7, Episode 15, Christmas in Canada. Now, you guys know the drill. The link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below, but first, a quick review. And by quick review, I mean, well, technically I have to start with a recap, so, it is Christmas time, or Hanukkah for the Broflovskis, yay! And good moment's over, because a couple of Canadians all of a sudden come in and they claim to be Ikes, birth parents, and they're like, oh, Canada has a new prime minister, and, you know, a bunch of new edicts have been issued, including one that says that all adopted kids in Canada need to be brought back or all adopted kids from Canada in the US need to be brought back to Canada, which makes everybody really sad. So Kyle's like, okay, I'm on a mission. I have to go to Canada to get my brother back. And, you know, Cartman is super mad because he's gonna have to miss Christmas, but he does anyways. And they initially fly there from the Citywalk guy. Citywalk guy flies them into Canada, and they arrive in a town where it's initially there's nobody around until a couple of Canadians pop up like, are you friendly? And I just knew immediately. I was just like, Wizard of Oz parody? And sure enough, like, it took me like another 1 or 2 minutes to absolutely confirm, even though I kind of already knew, that this episode in particular was just parroting the Wizard of Oz. I guess they just decided to parody Wizard of Oz. I guess they didn't want to parody a Christmas episode. The boys meet a few wacky characters along the way, but they eventually make their way to the Prime Minister, who turns out to be freaking Saddam Hussein. But Ike returns back to Kyle, and everything is, you know, oh, happy joy. Yay! Merry Christmas, everybody! It's honestly super fitting that this episode is supposed to be released the week of Christmas. I'm not even kidding about that. Like, it's like it's the Monday before Christmas this episode is supposed to be released, so it's just funny how the timing managed to work. But like I said, I immediately noticed the Wizard of Oz parody across the entirety of the episode, even with the wacky, zany characters. They met 3 wacky characters along the way. One being a Mountie who had a sheep and not a horse, one being a French-Canadian mime who could no longer drink wine, and yet here I am. And then a guy from Newfoundland, a Newfie, who makes it sound like it's a dog. No, it's not a dog, it's just somebody from Newfoundland. But a Newfie who can no longer practice sodomy. Now, initially when I was watching the episode, he said sodomy a couple times, but I couldn't understand what he was saying, so I just kind of dismissed it, but as soon as I looked into it and realized he was saying sodomy, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna pretend I didn't read that. What was actually really funny to learn was that while this episode was in production, the creators were like, oh, well, let's give Canada a new prime minister or something like that. And apparently a few weeks before the episode aired, Canada actually did get a new prime minister, which the creators were like, oh, didn't see that coming. It was actually something they didn't know about. And even better was that the whole reveal of Saddam Hussein being the new prime minister was actually, like, they didn't know who was going to be behind the Oz curtain. But the Sunday before the episode aired, Saddam Hussein was actually finally arrested, and so they're like, oh, we can make it Saddam Hussein. Done. Boom. Easy. So basically this episode is just one big fat parody with a couple of, you know, fun little nods, Easter eggs, references, whatever you want to call them, just kind of, well, not really sprinkled in there, more like just like tossed right in there, that just seemed to work well with the plot. And there's not really much else to say about the episode. That's all it basically was. It was about, you know, Kyle getting his little brother back, and then of course, you know, Kyle being at the end of the episode where it's like, you know, Ike needed us, so we raised him, so we may not be related by blood, but we're still family, which is exactly something I talked about and touched up on, after I had reacted to the Season 2 episode. I can't remember if it was episode 3 or 4, it was called Ike's Wee Wee, and as well as me discussing my favorite South Park episodes in the first 5 seasons, because that episode was by far one of my favorites. Hold on, I'll sneeze. But I absolutely remember talking about that, and I love how, again, it was brought up in this particular episode, because I love stuff like that. Like the saying goes, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the womb of the water. That's the actual phrase. You people think you know, blood is thicker than water. You think you know the phrase, but you actually don't. Actually, maybe some of you know what the actual phrase is, but I already just said it, so I suppose now you know. So there's that. But yeah, just one big parody episode with a couple of little references sprinkled in there, but then I feel like one of the icings on the cake was Cartman telling Kyle, if we don't get back home in time for Christmas, I'm gonna kick you in the nuts. Well, he didn't actually say that. He said he was gonna basically, you know, fight him kick his ass or something like that. And then, Cartman's like, oh, I'm about to. But Kyle's just like, bap. And Cartman just starts crying like a big baby. He actually gets a bloody nose, and I'm just like, okay, that was unexpected. I mean, yay, but unexpected. But at the same time, it's South Park. I feel like it should be expected. Why do I still not come to expect some of these crazy events that happen in the series? Really. Cartman can be as manipulative as he wants. He can be as clever as he wants, and he can do some pretty horrific things. But he's mostly bark and not a lot of bite. And I think for that reason alone, it shows that he still has, a few flaws. Like, yeah, he can do some pretty awful things, but he's still not, all powerful, and he's still a fat little piece of shite who can get bapped by his so-called friend and get a bloody nose from it. But the only thing that really surprised me was the Wizard of Oz general reference across the entirety of this episode. I just wasn't expecting it, and I'm like, Christmas episode, but Wizard of Oz? Okay. I guess the thing I do want to talk about a little bit now that I've, discussed all I really need to about the episode. There's not much to discuss, but this is the end. The end of another season. Season 7 is done. Well, Season 7 reactions and reviews are done. At least from me. And holy moly, this was a fantastic season. I can see why so many people were hyped for it, or were hyped for me to watch it and review it. Granted, a lot of people were like, not everybody, but a lot of people were saying that Season 6 was kind of the turning point where it started to get really good. And don't get me wrong, there were plenty of good episodes in Season 6, but there were so many good ones in Season 7. I honestly can't even pick a favorite right now. I need more time to think about that because so many of the episodes were so good. I swear, if I'm gonna have to do another, a top list of my favorite episodes from seasons 6 through 10, I'm gonna need to do a top 3 from this season, for sure. Because so many of these episodes were so good and for very different reasons. Granted, my favorite episodes may be different from your guys' favorite episodes, but again, it's not what I necessarily think was the best, but what I thought was either the most clever or the funniest or the ones I most connected with. Everybody's got their own favorites because they find them well written, or they connect with them in different ways, or something of the sort. Everybody's got their own opinions on it. What's the best is not going to be the same as what my favorites were, obviously. But man, there were definitely some good ones in this season. There were so many good ones, so many funny moments, so many great character moments from a lot of these characters. And we got to see a couple of the characters make return appearances and get a little bit of time to spend with them, especially Jimmy and Timmy from the second episode. And even with, Stan and Butters, and I think it was the last episode, the Raisins episode, getting so many, and then of course even Kyle and kind of Mr. Garrison a little bit from South Park is Gay. There were so many great character moments, so many funny and WTF moments. This season was so good, and I can absolutely understand the hype behind it. And apparently the creators, they love Season 7, but they apparently love Season 8 a lot more. So I honestly cannot wait for Season 8. But that's going to have to be for next time, which is going to be a while. I'm currently actually working on another series reaction project. I won't really talk about it quite yet, but it is going to consume quite a bit of my time for a while. So the break between Seasons 7 and 8 is probably going to be a little long. I think it might be a little bit more than a month. It depends on what I can do in the coming weeks and month. Because I'm going to need to take a lot of time to work on this project. It's sort of like a series reaction, but I'm doing it with a little bit more of a purpose. A slight bit of an interest, but with a little bit more of a purpose. So unfortunately, the gap between Seasons 7 and 8 is probably going to be a little bit longer than it has been in previous seasons, and I do apologize for that. But it also kind of depends on how quickly I manage to finish this other big project that I'm working on. And frankly, I'm also working on a really big, well, I'd say art project, but more like series of art projects as well that I want to finish probably before the 22nd or 23rd. So it's, yeah, definitely very important stuff going on. But I honestly, I cannot wait for season 8. I really can't. Season 7 was so good. Season 7 was so good. And I'm so happy that I watched it. I'm glad that, you know, some of you guys were hyping up seasons like 6 and especially 7 and 8 for sure. And I can definitely say, I can confirm that, yeah, you guys were right. The hype was worth it. The hype was absolutely worth it. Such good episodes. Nice. This has definitely been one of my favorite seasons, without a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt. This has been one of my favorite seasons. So, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to end this review here, my quick review of the entire season as a whole. I'll be back with season 8, but it probably is going to be a little while. I apologize, but it is what it is. But I will be coming back with season 8, I promise. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this reaction, and frankly, all the reactions of season 7. You guys are awesome for watching these and continuing to support. And I also do like this review system, and I'm probably going to be changing the review system slightly. I think for the better. We'll see what happens. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed all these videos. And thank you guys. And as usual, until the next video, guys, check you laters.